Hello everyone. Tonight, I've prepared a special compilation of trucker stories, all gathered into one soothing episode for you to enjoy. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It really helps support the channel. Now, let's begin. The radio station that plays my thoughts from Diesel Dan, they say. The loneliest stretch of highway in America runs through Nevada, a ribbon of asphalt that cuts through endless desert where the sky seems to stretch on forever and the stars shine so bright. They look like they could fall right down onto your windshield. I've been driving trucks for 23 years now, and I've rolled down every major interstate and most of the forgotten two-lane roads that snake through the forgotten parts of this country, but there's something about that Nevada stretch that always makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It's not just the emptiness or the way the desert seems to swallow sound, though both of those things are true enough. It's something else, something I can't quite put my finger on, like the land itself is watching you, waiting for something. My name is Dan, though most folks on the CB call me Diesel Dan, and I haul refrigerated goods from California to the East Coast and back again. It's steady work, pays decent, and I like the solitude of it, the way the road becomes a kind of meditation when you're out there long enough. But on this particular run, somewhere past midnight on a Tuesday in late October, I experienced something that shook that meditation right down to its foundation. Something that made me question whether I was really alone out there in the dark. I was about 200 miles east of Reno, heading toward Utah, when the radio started acting strange. I'd been listening to a classic rock station out of Salt Lake, though the signal was getting weaker with every mile, fading in and out like a heartbeat. Then, somewhere around mile marker 312, the music cut out entirely and was replaced by static, that old familiar hiss that sounds like the universe breathing. I reached over to change the station, my fingers dancing across the dial, searching for anything that might cut through the monotony of the engine's rumble and the whisper of tires on pavement. That's when I found it, a station I'd never picked up before. Coming through crystal clear despite being out in the middle of nowhere. There was no call sign, no DJ introduction, just music starting up as if it had been waiting for me to find it. The song was one I recognized immediately, an old Creedence Clearwater Revival tune called Long as I Can See the Light, and I smiled because it was one of my favorites, one that always made me think of home and the porch light my wife used to leave on for me until the cancer took her 3 years back. I settled into my seat, letting the music wash over me, and for a while, everything felt normal, felt right, like the universe was giving me a little gift on this lonely stretch of road. But then the song ended, and instead of another tune starting up, there was just silence for a moment, followed by a man's voice, deep and smooth like honey, speaking directly into the cab of my truck. Thinking about Martha again, Dan, the voice said, and my hands tightened on the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles went white. The voice knew my name, knew my wife's name, and that should have been impossible, because I hadn't told anyone where I was going, or what I was thinking about. My heart started hammering in my chest, that fight-or-flight response kicking in, even though there was nowhere to run and nothing to fight out here in the darkness. I grabbed the radio dial and started turning it, desperate to find another station. Any other station, but the voice just kept talking, kept speaking my thoughts out loud as if it could see right into my head. You're wondering if you should have been there more, the voice continued, each word landing like a stone in still water. You're thinking about all those nights you were on the road instead of home, all those moments you missed because you were chasing the next paycheck, the next mile. You're wondering if she forgave you, if she understood why you had to keep moving, keep driving, because staying still has always felt like dying to you. Everything the voice said was true, every word of it. Thoughts I'd been carrying around like stones in my pockets for years now, weighing me down but never quite heavy enough to make me stop. I wanted to turn the radio off, to cut the power and drive in silence, but my hand wouldn't move, wouldn't reach for the knob. Instead, I just kept driving, kept listening, as the voice spoke my deepest fears and regrets out loud in that smooth, knowing tone. She's waiting for you. Dan, the voice said after a moment. And now there was something else in it. Something that might have been kindness, or might have been cruelty. I couldn't tell which. Not in the way you think, not in some heaven or afterlife, but in the quiet moments when you let yourself remember. She's in every sunrise you see from the cab, every rest stop where you drink coffee and watch the world wake up. She forgave you long before she left, forgave you because she knew the road was in your blood, the same way love was in hers. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and unexpected, blurring my vision until the road ahead became just a smear of white lines and darkness. I had to pull over, had to stop before I drove right off into the desert. So I eased the truck onto the shoulder and sat there with the engine idling and the radio still playing that voice, still speaking my thoughts. "You're a good man, Dan," the voice said, softer now, almost gentle. "You did the best you could with what you knew, and that's all anyone can ever do. The guilt you're carrying isn't penance, it's just weight, and weight can be set down if you're brave enough to let it go." Martha knew you loved her, knew it in every phone call from the road, every present you brought home, every time you held her hand and promised you'd be back soon. She never doubted your love, not for a single moment, so maybe it's time you stopped doubting it too. The voice fell silent then, and for a long moment there was just the sound of my breathing and the idle of the engine and the vast empty desert stretching out in all directions. Then music started playing again, a slow, gentle melody I didn't recognize, something that sounded like a lullaby or a hymn, and I realized I was smiling through my tears, feeling something in my chest loosen and release like I'd been holding my breath for 3 years, and finally, I could exhale. I don't know how long I sat there on the side of the road, listening to that strange radio station play songs that seemed chosen just for me, each one touching some memory or emotion I'd been afraid to examine too closely. The music was beautiful and sad and hopeful all at once, and I felt like I was being wrapped in something warm and safe, like the universe was holding me the way Martha used to when I'd come home from a particularly hard run. Eventually the sky started to lighten in the east, that deep purple blue that comes before dawn, and the radio station began to fade, the signal growing weaker until it dissolved back into static. I reached over and turned the dial, found a country station out of Utah, playing morning news and weather, everything normal and mundane and real. My eyes were dry now, my breathing steady, and that weight I'd been carrying felt lighter somehow, like I'd set down a piece of it there on the side of that Nevada highway. I pulled back onto the road and continued east, watching the sun come up over the desert in a blaze of orange and gold that made the whole world look new again. I thought about that voice on the radio, wondered if it had been real, or if I'd just fallen asleep for a moment and dreamed the whole thing. But somehow it didn't matter, real or imagined. That conversation had given me something I desperately needed, a kind of permission to forgive myself, to let go of the guilt that had been eating at me since the day Martha died. Miles passed beneath my wheels, and I found myself talking out loud, telling Martha about the sunrise, about the strange radio station, about all the things I'd never said when she was alive, because I thought there would always be more time. The cab of the truck felt less empty somehow, like she was there with me in spirit, if not in body, riding shotgun the way she used to on the rare occasions when she'd join me for a run. I never found that radio station again, though I've tried many times since, scanning through the dial on that same stretch of highway, hoping to hear that voice one more time. But maybe that's how it's supposed to be. Maybe some things are meant to happen just once, in exactly the moment you need them most. These days when I drive through Nevada, I leave the radio off and just listen to the sound of the road and my own thoughts, and they don't seem quite as heavy as they used to. The desert still feels lonely, still feels like a place where the world holds its breath. But now I understand that loneliness and solitude aren't the same thing. I'm alone out here on these highways, sure, but I'm not lonely, not anymore. I carry Martha with me in every mile, in every moment, And that voice on the radio taught me that love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes form, becomes something you carry inside instead of something you hold in your arms. Sometimes late at night, when the stars are especially bright and the road is empty and still, I swear I can feel her hand on my shoulder, hear her voice telling me to be careful, to get some rest, to remember that I'm loved. And I smile and keep driving, knowing that wherever this road leads, whatever miles I have left to travel, I'm never really alone. The radio station that played my thoughts gave me that gift, gave me the understanding that grief and love are two sides of the same coin, and that carrying one doesn't mean abandoning the other. The lights following me through the desert, from Rusty Joe. There are places in this world where the night gets so dark you can't see your hand in front of your face, where the only light for miles comes from your headlights cutting through the blackness like knives through velvet. The desert is one of those places, especially out west, where civilization thins out until it's just you and the road and the vast emptiness that seems to go on forever in every direction. I've driven through plenty of dark places in my 15 years behind the wheel, but nothing prepared me for what I encountered on a stretch of Arizona Highway 1 autumn night when the moon was new and the stars provided the only light beyond my high beams. My name is Joe, though the CB handle I've carried for years is Rusty Joe on account of the old 1987 Peterbilt I drive. A truck that's seen better days, but still runs strong despite the rust eating at its edges. I haul mostly construction materials, lumber and steel and concrete, the heavy stuff that requires a strong back and a truck that can take the weight. The pay is decent, and the work is steady, and I've never been one to complain about the solitude of long hauls, or the way the road can swallow you whole if you let it. On this particular night, I was heading south from Flagstaff toward Phoenix, a run I'd made dozens of times before without incident. The highway was empty, not surprising for 3 in the morning on a weeknight, and I had it almost entirely to myself. The radio was playing softly, some talk show about UFOs and government conspiracies, the kind of thing that sounds absurd in daylight, but starts to feel almost reasonable when you're alone in the dark with nothing but desert stretching out in all directions. That's when I first noticed the lights in my mirrors. 2 bright points of white light that appeared suddenly behind me, maybe a quarter-mile back, matching my speed exactly. At first I assumed it was another trucker, someone else hauling through the night, and I didn't think much of it. But as the miles passed, and the lights stayed exactly the same distance behind me, never getting closer, never falling back, I started to feel uneasy. There was something about the way they moved, or didn't move, that felt wrong, artificial, like they were locked onto me somehow. I tried slowing down, letting my speed drop from 70 to 60 to 50, thinking whoever it was would pass me, or at least get closer. But the lights maintained that same quarter-mile distance, slowing when I slowed, their position in my mirrors never changing. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and I felt my pulse quicken, that primal response to being followed, being hunted. Even though I tried to tell myself it was probably nothing, just another driver who happened to be going the same speed. Then I sped up, pushing the old Peterbilt to 75, then 80. The engine roaring, and the whole truck shaking with the effort, but those lights stayed right where they were, exactly a quarter-mile back, as if connected to me by some invisible tether. Fear started creeping up my spine, cold and insistent, because this wasn't normal, wasn't natural, and I've been on the road long enough to know when something is very, very wrong. I grabbed the CB radio, keyed the mic, and called out on channel 19, hoping there was another trucker within range who might be able to see what I was seeing, maybe offer some explanation that would make sense. Breaker, breaker. This is Rusty Joe, heading south on I-17. Anybody out there got eyes on a vehicle behind me, maybe a quarter-mile back? Static answered me. That empty hiss that means you're alone on the airwaves. And I tried again, my voice sounding smaller this time, less certain. Come on, somebody talk to me. I got lights following me, and they ain't acting right. More static. And then, just as I was about to give up, a voice crackled through. old and worn like sandpaper on wood. "Those lights been following you long, son?" the voice asked, and there was something in it that made my skin prickle, something knowing and sad. I told him yes, told him about how they'd appeared out of nowhere and had been matching my speed for the last 20 miles, and there was a long pause before he spoke again. "Best advice I can give you is, don't stop, don't pull over, and don't try to outrun them. Just keep driving steady, keep your eyes on the road ahead, and maybe they'll get bored and move on to someone else." The radio went dead after that, nothing but static, no matter how many times I called out, and I was alone again, with just the sound of the engine and the lights in my mirrors. The old man's words echoed in my head, "Don't stop, don't pull over, don't try to outrun them." And I wondered what he knew, what he'd seen out here in the desert that made him give advice like that. But I followed it anyway, because I didn't have any better ideas. Just kept the truck moving at a steady 70 miles per hour, and tried not to look in the mirrors too often. The miles crawled by, each one feeling like 10, and the lights never wavered, never changed, just hung there behind me like eyes watching, waiting. I started to notice other things too, strange things that made my unease turn into real fear. The radio had gone completely silent, not even static now, just dead air, as if every signal in the world had been cut off. The temperature inside the cab had dropped, my breath coming out in little clouds, even though the heater was running full blast. And strangest of all, I couldn't see any stars anymore, couldn't see the desert on either side of the road, just darkness pressing in from all directions, until it felt like I was driving through a tunnel, with no beginning and no end. I've never been a religious man, never put much stock in things like fate, or destiny, or the supernatural, but in that moment, I found myself praying, whispering words I have remembered from childhood church services, asking whatever power might be listening to get me through this, to see me safely to the other side of whatever this was. The words felt hollow in my mouth, inadequate against the weight of that darkness and those relentless lights, but I said them anyway because it was all I had. Time became strange, elastic, stretching and compressing until I couldn't tell if I'd been driving for minutes or hours. The fuel gauge hadn't moved, the odometer wasn't turning, and my phone had died completely, the screen black no matter how many times I pressed the power button. It was like I'd slipped out of the normal world into some pocket dimension where the usual rules didn't apply, where I could drive forever and never arrive anywhere, never escape those lights that followed me through the endless dark. Then, just when I thought I might lose my mind completely, might give up and pull over and face whatever was following me, I saw something ahead, a glow on the horizon, faint at first, but growing stronger, the blessed light of civilization breaking through the darkness. It was a truck stop, a 24 oasis of fluorescent lights and diesel pumps and other human beings, and I nearly sobbed with relief at the sight of it. I pushed the truck harder, willing it toward that light, and as I got closer I noticed something else. The lights behind me were fading, growing dimmer and more distant, as if they couldn't follow me into the illuminated world, as if they belonged only to the darkness and had to retreat when faced with human light and presence. By the time I pulled into the truck stop and killed the engine, they were gone completely, vanished as mysteriously as they'd appeared. I sat in the cab for a long time, hands shaking, breath coming in ragged gasps, trying to process what had just happened. Other trucks were parked around me, their drivers sleeping or eating or doing paperwork, going about their normal routines, completely unaware that I'd just driven through something that defied explanation. I wanted to tell someone, wanted to grab the nearest person and pour out the whole story, but I knew how it would sound, knew they'd think I'd fallen asleep at the wheel and dreamed the whole thing. Eventually, I climbed down from the cab and went inside, bought coffee and a sandwich I couldn't taste, sat in a booth by the window and watched the sun come up over the desert. The light felt like a benediction, like proof that the world was still normal, still real, and I savored every moment of it. Other drivers came and went, and I listened to their conversations about traffic and weather and delivery schedules. Ordinary concerns that felt precious after what I'd experienced. I never told anyone about the lights, never filed a report or mentioned it on the CB, because I knew there was no point. Who would believe me? Who could explain what I'd seen? Instead, I carry it with me, a secret weight, a reminder that the world is stranger and darker than we like to admit, and that there are things out there in the empty places that don't follow the rules we've built our lives around. These days I try to avoid driving through Arizona at night, especially on that stretch of highway between Flagstaff and Phoenix. I take the long way around, add hours to my route, anything to avoid being out there in the dark where those lights might be waiting. Some of the other drivers laugh at me, call me superstitious, but I don't care. I know what I saw, know what followed me through that endless darkness, and I have no desire to see it again. The desert still calls to me sometimes, the way it always has, with its vast spaces and stunning sunsets and sense of ancient timelessness. But now, there's a shadow over it, a knowledge that beauty and terror can exist in the same place, that the same emptiness that makes you feel free can also swallow you whole. I respect that shadow now, respect the darkness and whatever lives in it. And I make sure I'm never out there alone when the sun goes down and the stars come out and the lights start following again. The passenger who appears when I blink from Highway Hank. They say the human mind can play tricks on you when you've been driving too long. When exhaustion sets in and the white lines start to blur together and your eyelids feel like they're made of lead. I've been a trucker for 18 years, and I've experienced my share of highway hypnosis. Those moments where you suddenly realize you've driven 20 miles and don't remember a single second of it. But what happened to me on a run through Montana last spring wasn't highway hypnosis, wasn't my mind playing tricks, though God knows I wish it had been that simple. My name is Hank, and on the CB, they call me Highway Hank because I've spent more of my life on the road than off it, more comfortable behind the wheel than anywhere else. I haul refrigerated produce, mostly. Taking lettuce and tomatoes and strawberries from California farms to grocery stores across the Midwest and East Coast. It's honest work, steady work, and I've never had cause to complain about it until that night in Montana when I learned that some roads are haunted by more than just memories. I was driving through the night, heading east on I-90, somewhere between Billings and Miles City, a stretch of highway so empty and dark, it feels like driving across the moon. The radio had given up hours ago, nothing but static, no matter where I turned the dial. So I was alone with my thoughts and the sound of the engine and the occasional rush of wind when a semi passed going the other way. It was late April, but still cold up there, patches of snow lingering in the shadows where the sun didn't reach, and I had the heater running to keep the chill at bay. That's when I first saw her, just for a second, a woman sitting in the passenger seat when I blinked. I jerked my head to the right, heart hammering, but the seat was empty. Just shadows and the faint glow from the dashboard. I told myself I was tired, that I'd been driving for 11 hours straight and my eyes were playing tricks. But my hands were shaking on the wheel, and I couldn't quite convince myself that's all it was. I kept driving, kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead. But every time I blinked, I saw her again, sitting there calm as could be, wearing an old-fashioned dress that looked like something from the 1950s. Her hands folded in her lap, and her face turned toward the window. She never looked at me, never acknowledged my presence, just sat there, as if riding along was the most natural thing in the world. Each time I opened my eyes, she was gone, but the image lingered, burned into my retinas like a camera flash, and I started to dread blinking, started trying to keep my eyes open as long as possible, until they burned and watered. But you can't drive without blinking, can't keep your eyes open forever. And so she kept appearing and disappearing, a passenger who existed only in the space between one moment and the next. I tried everything to make it stop, tried turning on all the lights in the cab, tried talking to myself, tried slapping my face to make sure I was awake, but nothing worked. She just kept coming back, kept sitting there in that passenger seat, and slowly, gradually, terror gave way to something else, something like curiosity mixed with resignation. After about an hour of this, I finally spoke to her, Felt foolish doing it, but figured I had nothing to lose. "Who are you?" I asked the empty seat, my voice sounding strange in the quiet cab. "What do you want?" I blinked, and there she was again, still staring out the window, and for just a second I thought I saw her lips move. Thought I heard a whisper of sound beneath the engine's rumble, but when I opened my eyes, she was gone again, and I was left wondering if I'd imagined it. The miles continued to pass beneath my wheels, and gradually I noticed something changing. The woman was getting clearer each time I saw her, more solid, more real, as if she was slowly crossing over from wherever she existed into my world. I could see details now that I'd missed before, the pattern of flowers on her dress, the way her hair was pinned back from her face, the wedding ring on her left hand. She looked young, maybe 30, with a sadness in her eyes that made my chest ache, even though I didn't know who she was, or why she was haunting my truck. I thought about pulling over, about stopping at the next rest area and trying to sleep this off. But something told me that wouldn't help, that she would still be there, no matter where I went, or what I did. So I kept driving, kept watching her appear and disappear with each blink. And slowly, I started to feel like she was trying to tell me something, trying to communicate in the only way she could. Then, somewhere past midnight, I saw the turnoff for a small town called Forsyth, just a name on a sign and a cluster of lights in the distance. And when I blinked, the woman was pointing, her arm extended toward the exit. Her face turned toward me for the first time. Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw such desperate pleading that I found myself hitting the turn signal. Found myself taking the exit without really deciding to, following her silent direction because what else could I do? The town was small, maybe a few thousand people, and everything was closed this time of night except for a gas station on the main street. I pulled into the lot and killed the engine, sat there in the sudden silence, and tried to figure out what to do next. When I blinked, the woman was still there, but now she was pointing toward something behind the gas station. Toward a small cemetery I could just make out in the moonlight, old headstones leaning at crazy angles among overgrown grass. I've never believed in ghosts, never put stock in the supernatural, but I climbed down from the cab and walked toward that cemetery anyway, drawn by something I couldn't name. The night was cold and clear, stars blazing overhead, and my breath came out in clouds as I picked my way between the graves, looking for I didn't know what. Then I saw it, a headstone near the back, newer than the others, with her name carved into the granite. Sarah Mackenzie, 1929 to 1957, beloved wife and mother. I stood there reading the inscription, and something clicked in my mind. A memory of a story I'd heard years ago from an old-timer at a truck stop. A woman named Sarah Mackenzie had died in a car accident on I-90 back in 1957. Her car hit by a truck that didn't see her in the dark. The driver had been heading east, just like I was, and the accident had happened right around here, right outside Forsyth. She'd been on her way home from visiting her mother, leaving behind a husband and 2 small children, and the truck driver had been so racked with guilt, he'd quit the road forever. I don't know how long I stood there by her grave, but when I finally blinked again, she was standing beside me, solid and real, in a way she hadn't been before. She didn't speak, didn't need to, just looked at me with those sad eyes, and then down at the grave, and I understood. She'd been riding with truckers all these years, appearing when they blinked, trying to find someone who would listen, who would stop, who would remember her and know her story. "I'm sorry," I whispered to her ghost or memory, or whatever she was. "I'm sorry for what happened to you. Sorry, you've been alone out here all this time." And when I blinked this time, she was smiling, just a little, and when I opened my eyes, she was gone, really gone, and I knew somehow that she wouldn't be coming back, that whatever she'd needed from me, she'd received. I walked back to my truck on shaky legs, climbed into the cab, and sat there for a long time before starting the engine. The passenger seat was empty and stayed empty, no matter how many times I blinked, and the relief I felt was mixed with something else. Something like grief for a woman I'd never known but whose story I'd carry with me now forever. I finished my run to Miles City, dropped my load, and headed back west, but I made a point to stop in Forsyth again on the way through. I bought flowers from a grocery store, took them to Sarah Mackenzie's grave, and left them there with a silent prayer that she'd found peace, that whatever part of her had been trapped on that highway was finally free. The cemetery was quiet in the afternoon sun, peaceful in a way it hadn't been at night, and I felt like I was saying goodbye to a friend even though we'd never really met. These days when I drive through Montana, I always think of Sarah. Always remember the woman who appeared when I blinked, and I drive more carefully through Forsyth, more aware that every stretch of road has a history, that the pavement we travel on is marked by countless stories of lives lived and lost. I haven't seen her again, haven't had any more passengers who appear between blinks, and for that I'm grateful. But I'm also grateful that I stopped that night, that I listened to what she was trying to tell me, that I gave her story the attention it deserved. The road is full of ghosts. I know that now. Spirits of people who died too soon, or in ways too sudden to comprehend. And sometimes they reach out to us in whatever way they can. Most drivers would have ignored her, would have chalked it up to fatigue and kept driving. But I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I took that exit, found that grave, learned her name, because everyone deserves to be remembered, even the ghosts who ride along when we blink. The rest stop, where every clock shows 3 a.m. from Silent Sam. There's a rest stop on I-40 in New Mexico that doesn't appear on any maps, doesn't show up on GPS, but every trucker who's been on the road long enough knows about it. It's always there when you need it most. When you're fighting to keep your eyes open and the white lines are starting to swim in your vision, appearing out of the darkness like a mirage made solid. But there's something wrong about that rest stop, something that makes your skin crawl, even as you're grateful for a place to pull over and rest your eyes. My name is Sam, though I don't talk much, which is why they call me Silent Sam on the CB, and I've been hauling freight across this country for more years than I care to count. I've seen a lot of strange things on the road, things that would make most people question their sanity, but nothing prepared me for what I experienced at that rest stop one cold November night when I was so tired I could barely see straight. I'd been driving for 16 hours, pushing the limits of what's legal and what's safe, trying to make a delivery deadline in Albuquerque. The coffee had stopped working hours ago, and I was running on nothing but stubbornness and the fear of falling asleep at the wheel. That's when I saw it, a rest stop sign reflecting in my headlights, promising bathrooms and picnic tables, and a place to close my eyes for a few minutes. I didn't remember seeing this rest stop on previous runs, but I was too tired to care, too desperate for a break, to question it. I pulled into the lot, and immediately noticed how empty it was. Not a single other vehicle in sight, which was strange for a rest stop on a major interstate. But again, I was too tired to think much of it, just grateful for the space and the quiet. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. And that's when I noticed the clock on the dashboard showed 3 o'clock in the morning exactly, which couldn't be right, because I'd started this leg of the trip at 9 p.m., and it should have been closer to 1 or 2 at the latest. I shrugged it off, figured my clock had died or reset somehow, and climbed down from the cab. The night air was cold enough to make me catch my breath, carrying that high desert chill that cuts right through your jacket, and I hurried toward the bathroom building, a squat concrete structure with flickering fluorescent lights. Inside, everything looked normal enough, clean but worn, the kind of institutional cleanliness that comes from regular maintenance rather than actual care. That's when I saw the clock on the wall, one of those standard round ones with a white face and black hands, and it showed exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. I frowned, pulled out my phone to check the time, but the screen wouldn't turn on. The battery apparently dead even though I'd charged it fully before leaving. A prickle of unease ran up my spine, but I told myself it was just coincidence. Just a dead phone battery and a stopped clock, nothing to worry about. I finished in the bathroom and walked back outside, planning to sit in the cab for a few minutes before getting back on the road, but something made me pause and look around. The rest stop had picnic tables under a covered pavilion, A small playground with swings moving slightly in the breeze even though there was no wind, and a row of vending machines humming softly against the far wall. Everything looked normal, looked real, but there was something off about it. Something that made my skin crawl, even though I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Then I noticed the other clocks. One above the vending machines, another on the side of the information kiosk, and they all showed the same time. 3 o'clock in the morning. Every single one of them, frozen at that exact moment, as if time itself had stopped when the clock struck 3 and never started again. My heart began to beat faster, that primal response to wrongness, to being in a place where the rules don't work the way they're supposed to. I started walking toward my truck, suddenly desperate to leave this place, but movement caught my eye, and I froze. There was someone sitting at one of the picnic tables. A figure I was certain hadn't been there a moment ago, hunched over with their back to me. I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, couldn't make out any details in the harsh fluorescent light, but something about their posture made me think they'd been sitting there for a very long time, waiting for something or someone. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the empty lot. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge me in any way, just kept sitting there, motionless. I took a step closer, then another, drawn by morbid curiosity even though every instinct was screaming at me to get back in my truck and drive away as fast as I could. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Still no response, and I was close enough now to see that whoever it was wore old-fashioned clothing, a style from maybe the 60s or 70s, and their hands on the table were pale, almost translucent in the harsh light. I reached out, almost touched their shoulder, then pulled back at the last second, because something about this felt deeply wrong, felt like crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed. That's when they turned to look at me, and I saw their face, or rather the absence of a face, just a smooth blank space where features should have been. I stumbled backward, a scream building in my throat, and the figure stood up, still facing me, still showing that terrible blank space. I turned and ran for my truck, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. I finally managed to climb inside and lock the doors, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and when I looked back toward the picnic table, the figure was gone. The whole rest stop was empty again, as if I'd imagined the whole thing, but my racing heart and trembling hands told me it had been real, whatever it was. I jammed the key in the ignition, started the engine, and was about to pull out when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The clock on my dashboard still showed 3 o'clock in the morning, and as I watched, the second hand ticked backward, then forward, then backward again, as if time itself couldn't decide which way to flow. I grabbed the wheel and stomped on the gas, tires squealing as I pulled out of the parking lot and back onto the highway. And I didn't slow down until I'd put at least 10 miles between me and that place. When I finally did slow down, when my heart rate had returned to something close to normal, I checked the dashboard clock again and found it was working properly, showing 4:30 in the morning, which meant I'd lost an hour and a half somehow, time that had simply vanished into whatever pocket dimension that rest stop existed in. My phone was working again too, fully charged as if it had never died, and the GPS showed no rest stop where I'd pulled over. Just empty highways stretching through the desert. I finished my run to Albuquerque, dropped my load, but I couldn't shake the memory of that place. Couldn't stop thinking about the figure at the picnic table and all those clocks showing the same impossible time. I started asking other drivers about it, carefully, not wanting to sound crazy, and I found that I wasn't the only one who'd experienced it. Every trucker I talked to had a similar story, of pulling into a rest stop that shouldn't exist, of losing time, of seeing things that couldn't be real. Some said it was a glimpse into another dimension, a place where time had gotten stuck somehow and couldn't move forward. Others claimed it was haunted by people who'd died at 3 in the morning and were trapped there, doomed to relive that moment forever. A few thought it was some kind of test, that the rest stop appeared to drivers who needed it and showed them something about themselves they needed to see. I didn't know what to believe, didn't know if any of those explanations made sense, but I knew I never wanted to go back there. These days when I'm driving through New Mexico and exhaustion starts to creep in, I push through it, refuse to pull over no matter how tired I get, because I'm terrified that rest stop will appear again, and this time I won't be able to leave. I've heard stories of drivers who went there and never came back, trucks found abandoned in the desert with no sign of the driver. And while I don't know if those stories are true, I'm not willing to risk finding out. The road is full of places like that. I've learned, places that exist between here and there, between now and then. Places where the normal rules don't apply, and time can run backward or stop altogether. Most people never see them, never need them, but for those of us who spend our lives on the highway, who push ourselves past the limits of endurance in pursuit of one more mile, one more delivery, they're always waiting, always there when we're at our weakest, offering rest that comes with a price we might not want to pay. I still drive through New Mexico, still take the same routes I always have, but I'm more careful now, more aware that not everything that appears in your headlights is what it seems. I keep my gas tank fuller, my rest breaks more regular, and I never, ever pull over at a rest stop I don't recognize, no matter how tired I am, because I know that somewhere out there, on some forgotten stretch of I-40, there's a place where every clock shows 3 o'clock in the morning, and time has forgotten how to move forward, and I have no desire to visit it again. The memory haunts me still, that faceless figure at the picnic table, those frozen clocks, that feeling of being trapped in a moment that wouldn't end. I carry it with me on every run, a reminder that the world is stranger than we admit, that there are thin places where reality wears through and something else shows through, and that sometimes the best thing you can do is keep driving, keep moving forward, and never look back. The voice that keeps saying turn around from Iron Ike. The human voice is something we're programmed to respond to from birth, wired deep in our brains to recognize and react to the sound of someone speaking, especially when that voice carries urgency or warning. I've been driving trucks for 21 years, and in that time I've learned to trust my instincts, to listen when something tells me to slow down, or take a different route, or check my mirrors. But what happened to me on a lonely stretch of Wyoming highway last winter taught me that sometimes the warnings we receive come from places we can't explain, and in voices that shouldn't exist. My name is Ike, and they call me Iron Ike on the CB, because I've got a reputation for being steady, unshakable, the kind of driver who doesn't rattle easily and can handle whatever the road throws at him. I haul livestock mostly, cattle and horses, from ranch to ranch or from ranch to market, and I've seen everything from blizzards to breakdowns, to animals escaping their trailers in the middle of nowhere. I thought I'd experienced every possible challenge the road could offer, but I was wrong. It was January, deep winter in Wyoming, and I was hauling a load of cattle from Cheyenne to Billings, taking Highway 25 north through some of the most desolate country in America. The weather forecast had called for clear skies, but anyone who's spent time in Wyoming knows that weather can change in minutes, that a clear morning can turn into a whiteout by afternoon. Still, I'd made this run dozens of times, and I wasn't worried, just focused on keeping the truck moving and the heater running, because the temperature outside was hovering around 0. I was maybe an hour north of Casper when I first heard the voice, clear as day, speaking directly into my ear, as if someone was sitting in the passenger seat. "Turn around," it said, just those 2 words, spoken in a tone that was calm but insistent, and I jerked my head to the right, expecting to see someone there, even though I knew I was alone. The seat was empty, of course, just shadows and the faint glow from the dashboard, and I told myself I'd imagined it, that isolation and the monotony of the road were playing tricks on my mind. But 10 minutes later it came again, the same voice, the same 2 words, "Turn around." This time I was certain I'd heard it, certain it wasn't my imagination, and a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. I checked the CB radio, thinking maybe someone was trying to reach me, but there was only static. That empty hiss that meant I was too far from any other trucks to pick up their signals. My phone showed no service, not unusual out here in the middle of nowhere, and I was truly alone with just the voice and the road, and the cattle shifting in the trailer behind me. I kept driving, kept my eyes fixed on the highway ahead, because turning around made no sense. I had a schedule to keep, a delivery to make, and there was nothing behind me but empty miles and wasted time. The sky was still clear, the road was in good condition, and every rational part of my brain said to ignore the voice and continue north. But it kept coming back, kept repeating those same 2 words every 10 or 15 minutes, like a clock chiming the hour, and with each repetition, my unease grew stronger. Turn around. The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old, just somehow universal, like it could belong to anyone or no one. There was no threat in it, no anger, just that calm insistence, as if whoever was speaking knew something I didn't, and was trying to warn me of danger ahead. I found myself gripping the steering wheel tighter, found myself checking my mirrors more often, looking for something that might explain what I was hearing, but there was nothing, just empty highway stretching toward the horizon. After the voice had repeated its warning for the 5th or 6th time, I started to seriously consider following its advice. Every instinct I'd developed over 2 decades on the road was screaming that something was wrong, that I should listen, that I should turn around and head back south, no matter how irrational it seemed. But pride and stubbornness kept me moving forward, kept me thinking that I was being foolish, that I'd feel ridiculous if I turned around based on nothing more than a voice in my head. Then the sky began to change, subtle at first, just a darkening on the northern horizon that could have been anything, could have been nothing. But it grew quickly, spreading across the sky like spilled ink, and I recognized it for what it was, a massive storm system moving in fast, the kind of blizzard that can reduce visibility to 0 in minutes and turn a simple drive into a fight for survival. The weather forecast had been wrong, or the storm had changed direction, and now I was heading straight into it with a trailer full of cattle and no good options for shelter. Turn around, the voice said again, and this time I listened. I found a wide spot in the road, carefully maneuvered the truck and trailer into a turn, and started heading back south, back toward Casper, back toward safety. The relief I felt was immediate and overwhelming, as if I'd been holding my breath and could finally exhale. And I whispered a thank you to whoever or whatever had been warning me, trying to keep me safe. The storm hit less than 20 minutes later, snow coming down so thick and fast that I could barely see the hood of my truck, wind howling like something alive and angry. If I'd kept going north, I would have been caught in the worst of it, miles from any town or shelter, and the chances of making it through safely would have been slim at best. Instead, I made it back to a truck stop outside Casper, pulled in, and watched from the warmth of the diner as the blizzard raged outside, dumping 3 feet of snow in a matter of hours and closing the highway for 2 days. I sat there drinking coffee and thinking about that voice, wondering where it had come from and why it had chosen to warn me. Other truckers told stories about guardian angels and premonitions, about knowing things they shouldn't know, and being saved from disasters they never saw coming. An old-timer named Dutch told me about a time he'd heard his dead mother's voice telling him to check his brakes. And when he did, he found a line about to rupture that would have caused complete brake failure on a mountain pass. Another driver swore he'd been warned about black ice by a voice that sounded like his high school football coach, and following that warning had saved his life. I don't know if I believe in guardian angels or ghosts or premonitions. Don't know if I can explain what happened in any rational way. All I know is that a voice told me to turn around, and I eventually listened, and that decision almost certainly saved my life and the lives of the cattle I was hauling. Maybe it was my subconscious picking up on subtle signs I didn't consciously register. Some part of my brain that noticed the change in air pressure or the shift in the clouds and tried to warn me in the only way it knew how. Or maybe it was something else, something beyond explanation, a guardian presence that watches over those of us who spend our lives on the road. In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself thinking about all the times I'd ignored my instincts. All the times I'd pushed forward when something told me to stop, or turn back, or take a different route. How many close calls had I had without even realizing it? How many times had I been saved by nothing more than luck or timing or some unconscious decision that pulled me back from disaster? The thought was humbling and terrifying in equal measure, a reminder that we're never as in control as we like to think, that life can turn on moments so small we don't even notice them. I haven't heard the voice again since that day in Wyoming, though I've been back on that same stretch of highway many times. Part of me wonders if I'll ever hear it again, if whatever protected me that day is still watching, still ready to warn me if danger approaches. Another part of me hopes I never need to hear it again, hopes that I've learned to trust my instincts better, to listen to the subtle warnings that come from within rather than waiting for a voice to tell me what to do. These days I pay more attention to the world around me, more aware of the signs that something might be wrong. I check weather reports more carefully, plan my routes with more caution, and I never ignore that feeling in my gut that tells me something isn't right. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone on an empty highway, I find myself talking out loud, thanking whatever presence warned me that day in Wyoming, thanking it for caring enough about one stubborn trucker to keep repeating those two simple words until I finally listened. The road is full of mysteries, I've learned, full of things that can't be explained by logic or science or rational thought. We like to think we understand the world, that we've mapped every corner and explained every phenomenon. But the truth is, there are still thin places where the impossible bleeds through, where voices can speak across whatever divide separates the living from something else. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't need to understand everything. We just need to listen when the warnings come and be grateful that we're not as alone out here as we sometimes feel. I carry that day with me always, a reminder that humility is as important as confidence, that listening is as important as knowing, and that sometimes the best thing you can do is turn around, even when every logical reason says to keep going forward. The voice gave me that gift, gave me my life back in those two simple words, and I'll never forget it or take it for granted, because somewhere out there, on some lonely highway, another driver might hear the same warning, and I hope they listen faster than I did, hope they trust what they're hearing before it's too late. The bridge that vanishes in the morning from Outlaw Owen. There are structures in this world that shouldn't exist. Roads and bridges, and buildings that appear in places where maps show nothing, where GPS signals go dead, and common sense says there's only empty space. I've spent 16 years driving trucks across every state in the Union, and I thought I knew every major route and alternate path, every bridge and overpass and shortcut worth knowing. But on a foggy October night in Oregon, I discovered a bridge that changed everything I thought I understood about the world. My name is Owen, and they call me Outlaw Owen on the CB. Not because I'm some kind of criminal, but because I have a reputation for taking shortcuts, for finding routes that shave hours off delivery times, for knowing the back roads and alternate paths that most drivers never discover. I haul general freight, whatever needs moving from point A to point B, and I pride myself on always finding the fastest way to get there, even if it means taking roads that barely appear on maps. On this particular night, I was heading south through Oregon, trying to make Eugene before dawn, with a load of electronics that needed to be there for a morning delivery. I'd taken Highway 5 south from Portland, but somewhere around Salem, I decided to take an alternate route, a state highway that would cut through the mountains and save me nearly an hour if the weather held. The fog was thick, rolling in from the coast in great gray waves that turned the world into something dreamlike and uncertain, but I'd driven through worse, and I wasn't worried. The highway climbed into the foothills, winding through forests of Douglas fir and cedar, and the fog got thicker until my headlights could barely penetrate more than 20 feet ahead. I slowed down, being careful, and that's when I saw the bridge. A massive steel structure spanning a gorge I didn't remember being there. Appearing out of the fog like something from another time, it looked old, Victorian-era old, with ornate ironwork and massive support towers that must have been built 100 years ago or more, and I couldn't understand how I'd never noticed it before. There was no sign indicating what the bridge was called, or what it crossed, no warning about weight limits or clearance. Just the structure itself looming out of the mist, like a ghost from history. I slowed to a crawl, studying it in my headlights, and something about it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It looked real enough, looked solid, but there was something wrong about it. Something that didn't quite fit with the world around it, like a painting hung in the wrong gallery. I should have turned around right then, should have trusted my instincts and found another route. But time was pressing, and this bridge was clearly the way forward, the highway running straight across it with no alternate path visible. So I eased the truck forward, felt the wheels transition from asphalt to the metal grating of the bridge deck, and started across, trying to ignore the way my stomach was churning and my hands were sweating on the wheel. The bridge seemed impossibly long, stretching away into the fog with no end visible, and I found myself wondering what gorge or river it crossed. What geographic feature had required such a massive structure? But I couldn't see anything below, couldn't see anything to either side. Just the bridge itself suspended in fog so thick it might as well have been solid cloud. The sound of my tires on the metal grating was loud in the silence. A rhythmic thumping that seemed to echo strangely, as if the bridge went on forever in both directions. Time became elastic, stretching and compressing in ways that didn't make sense, and I couldn't tell if I'd been driving for minutes or hours. The odometer wasn't moving, the GPS was dead, showing only a blank screen, and my phone had no signal, nothing but a spinning wheel where the network bars should have been. I started to panic, started to think about stopping, but something told me that would be a mistake, that the only way through was forward, that stopping on this bridge might mean never leaving it. Then I saw lights ahead, warm yellow lights that looked like street lamps or maybe candles. And as I got closer I realized there were people on the bridge, figures standing along the sides, watching me pass. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothing, styles from different eras all mixed together. Victorian suits next to 1920s dresses, next to what looked like pioneer clothing, and they all stood perfectly still, their faces turned toward my truck as I rolled past. None of them moved, none of them acknowledged me beyond their watching, and I couldn't tell if they were real, or some kind of projection or hallucination brought on by the fog and the strangeness of this place. I kept driving, kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, tried not to look at the watching figures, but I could feel their gaze following me, could sense their attention like a weight on my shoulders. There must have been dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all standing silent and still as statues, and I wondered who they were, what they were doing here, why they were watching me cross this impossible bridge in the middle of the night. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the bridge ended, and I was back on normal highway. Solid asphalt beneath my wheels, the fog beginning to thin as I descended back toward the valley floor. I pulled over at the first wide spot I found, hands shaking, breath coming in gasps, and tried to process what had just happened. The clock on my dashboard showed I'd lost 3 hours somehow, time that had simply vanished while I was crossing that bridge, and Eugene was much closer than it should have been, as if the bridge had somehow carried me farther south than should have been possible. I grabbed my phone, pulled up maps, and tried to find the bridge I'd just crossed. But there was nothing there, just a solid green line showing the highway I'd been on with no indication of any bridge, or gorge, or geographic feature that would require such a structure. I zoomed in, switched to satellite view, studied every inch of the route I'd taken, but the bridge simply didn't exist, at least not on any map I could access. When I finally made it to Eugene, I asked other drivers if they knew anything about a bridge on that route, described what I'd seen in as much detail as I could without sounding completely insane. A few of them knew what I was talking about, had their own stories of crossing a bridge that shouldn't exist, of losing time and seeing figures watching from the sides. One old-timer told me it was a ghost bridge, a structure that had been destroyed decades ago, but still existed somehow in the space between worlds, appearing only in fog or at certain times of year to those who were meant to see it. I went back the next day, drove the same route in daylight with clear skies, and found nothing. No bridge, no gorge, just a straightforward stretch of highway running through the mountains with no unusual features. The place where I remembered crossing the bridge was just forest, solid ground on both sides of the road. And if there had ever been a structure there, it had left no trace, no foundations or support towers or any sign it had existed. Since then I've tried to find that bridge again, have driven that route dozens of times at different times of day and night, in different weather conditions, but it's never appeared again. Other drivers tell similar stories of seeing it once and never being able to find it again, as if it exists in only one moment, in one place, and you can't return to it no matter how hard you try. Some say it's a doorway between worlds, a thin place where reality is flexible and time doesn't flow the way it should. Others claim it's a memory made solid, a ghost of something that used to exist and refuses to completely fade. I don't know what the truth is. Don't know if I can explain what I experienced in any rational way. But I know what I saw, know what I felt crossing that bridge in the fog with those silent figures watching. It changed something in me, changed the way I see the world and my place in it, made me realize that reality is more fluid and mysterious than I'd ever imagined. The roads we travel are marked not just by miles and exits, but by moments like this, by experiences that defy explanation and remind us that we're surrounded by mystery every day. We just usually don't see it. These days I still take shortcuts, still pride myself on knowing the alternate routes. But I'm more careful now, more aware that some roads lead to places we're not meant to go, that some bridges exist in spaces between here and there, and crossing them comes with a cost we might not understand. I carry the memory of that foggy October night with me always. The image of those watching figures and that impossible structure suspended in mist. And sometimes I wonder if I'll ever see it again, if the bridge will appear one more time and show me something new about the world and my journey through it. The bridge that vanishes in the morning taught me that the world is full of doorways, that the maps we trust are incomplete, and that sometimes the shortest route takes you through places that exist only at the edges of perception, visible only to those who are willing to see. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we need those mysteries, those unexplained moments that remind us we don't have all the answers, that the universe is vast and strange and full of wonders we've barely begun to comprehend. The truck that won't start until it's dark from Diesel Dave. There's a particular kind of frustration that comes from mechanical problems, from turning a key and hearing nothing but a click or a grind, or that awful silence that means something essential has failed. I've been a mechanic and a trucker for 19 years, and I can diagnose most problems by sound alone, can tell you what's wrong with an engine before I even pop the hood. But the truck I bought 3 years ago, a beautiful 2018 Kenworth that should have been the pride of my fleet, has taught me that some problems can't be solved with wrenches and diagnostic computers, that some mysteries run deeper than mechanical failure. My name is Dave. They call me Diesel Dave because I've always run diesel engines, and I can fix just about anything that runs on fuel and compression. And I thought I'd seen every possible truck problem there was to see. Blown head gaskets, failed injectors, electrical gremlins that would drive other mechanics to tears. I'd handled them all with patience and knowledge accumulated over decades. But when I bought this Kenworth from an estate sale in Kentucky, when I drove it home and discovered its particular quirk, I realized I was dealing with something beyond my expertise. The truck ran perfectly, smooth and powerful, the engine purring like it was brand new, even though it had over 300,000 miles on it. But it would only start after dark, would only turn over and fire up once the sun had set and darkness had fallen. During the day, no matter what I did, no matter how many times I turned the key or checked the battery or tested the starter, it would sit there, silent and dead, utterly refusing to cooperate. Then, as soon as twilight deepened into night, as soon as the last light faded from the sky, I could turn the key and it would start immediately, perfectly, every single time. At first I thought it was some kind of electrical issue, maybe a sensor that was reading sunlight somehow and preventing ignition, though that made no logical sense. I took it to 3 different mechanics, had them run every diagnostic test available, had them tear apart the electrical system and check every wire and connection. They all told me the same thing. Mechanically, electrically, in every way they could measure, the truck was perfect. There was no reason it shouldn't start, no explanation for its behavior. I tried everything I could think of, covered the windshield to block out light, parked it in a completely dark garage during the day, even tried starting it in the middle of the night and then keeping it running through the next day. Nothing worked. If the sun was up, the truck was dead. If the sun was down, the truck ran beautifully. It was consistent, predictable, and completely inexplicable. After about 6 months of this, after I'd exhausted every rational explanation and spent thousands of dollars on mechanics who couldn't solve the problem, I started asking around about the truck's history, trying to find out who'd owned it before and whether they'd experienced the same issue. What I learned was disturbing and sad in equal measure, a story that made me see my truck in a completely different light. The previous owner had been a man named Robert Chen, a long-haul trucker who'd driven nights exclusively for over 30 years, hauling goods across the country while most people slept. He'd been married once, had 2 kids, but the night driving had destroyed his marriage, made it impossible to maintain any kind of normal family life. He'd driven this Kenworth for the last 10 years of his life, had customized it and maintained it meticulously, had treated it like a home because in many ways, it was the only home he had. Robert had died in the truck. That's what the estate sale hadn't mentioned. Had died of a heart attack one morning just as the sun was coming up, slumped over the wheel in a rest area somewhere in Tennessee. The truck had been found hours later, Robert cold and gone, and it had been sold off as part of his estate, since he had no family left to claim it. I felt a chill when I learned this, felt like maybe I understood why the truck behaved the way it did, though understanding didn't make it any less strange. I started treating the truck differently after that, started talking to it sometimes when I was alone, thanking Robert for keeping it in such good condition, apologizing for trying to force it to run during the day. I know how that sounds. No, it makes me seem crazy. But something about the truck's behavior felt less like a malfunction and more like a preference, like it had absorbed Robert's habits and rhythms and refused to operate any other way. And here's the strangest part. Once I stopped fighting it, once I accepted that this truck was meant to run at night and started scheduling my loads accordingly, everything worked perfectly. I became a night driver by necessity, hauling freight while the sun was down, sleeping during the day, and the truck never gave me a moment's trouble. It ran smooth and strong, got excellent fuel economy, and seemed almost happy, if a machine can be said to have emotions. Other drivers thought I was crazy when I explained why I only drove at night, why I turned down daytime loads, no matter how good the pay. But I noticed something after a while, noticed that night driving had its own rhythm and beauty, that the roads were emptier, the world quieter, the experience somehow more meditative. I saw sunsets and sunrises from the road that took my breath away, saw the way cities looked lit up against the darkness, felt a peace I'd never experienced during daylight hours. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm rolling down some empty interstate, I swear I can feel Robert's presence in the cab with me, a kind of companionable silence that makes the solitude less lonely. I've started to think of him as a passenger of sorts, a ghost who rides along and makes sure the truck runs right, who guides me to the best routes and warns me when something needs attention. I know how that sounds. No, most people would say, I've been alone too long, but the feeling is real and comforting in its own strange way. I've had offers to buy the truck, good offers from people who've heard about its reputation, but I always turn them down. This truck and I have an understanding now, a partnership that works because I respect its nature, instead of trying to change it. We drive together through the darkness, Robert's truck and Robert's accidental air, and we do good work, moving freight across the country while the world sleeps. There's a lesson in this somewhere, I think, about accepting things as they are, instead of insisting they be what we want them to be. About working with the quirks and oddities, instead of against them. The truck that won't start until it's dark taught me patience and humility. Taught me to listen to what the world is trying to tell me, instead of imposing my will on every situation. And in return, it's given me a livelihood and a kind of peace I never expected to find. Sometimes I wonder what will happen when I'm gone, when this truck inevitably outlives me, the way it outlived Robert. Will it find another night driver? Another person willing to accept its peculiar nature and work within its constraints? Or will it finally give up? Finally allow itself to be just a normal truck that starts whenever someone turns the key? Part of me hopes it never changes, hopes it continues to insist on darkness. Because that quirk is what makes it special, what connects it to Robert, and now to me, a chain of night drivers stretching across time. The road at night is a different world, I've learned, full of its own beauty and mystery and moments of grace. The truck showed me that world, forced me into it through its stubborn refusal to operate any other way. And I'm grateful for that gift, even though I didn't choose it. We don't always get to choose our path, don't always get to decide how our lives unfold, but we can choose how we respond, whether we fight against our circumstances or find a way to work with them and maybe even thrive. So I'll keep driving at night, keep partnering with this strange and wonderful truck. And I'll keep talking to Robert sometimes, keeping him company the way he keeps me company. And when the sun goes down and the stars come out and I turn the key and hear that engine roar to life, I'll whisper a thank you to whatever force or spirit or mechanical quirk makes this truck run. Grateful for another night on the road, another chance to be part of something mysterious and beautiful. The fog that laughs from Ghost Gear Gary. Fog is one of those weather phenomena that can transform a familiar road into something alien and threatening, reducing visibility to almost nothing and turning simple navigation into a test of nerves and skill. I've driven through fog in every part of this country, from the thick coastal fogs of California to the valley fogs of Tennessee, and I've learned to respect it, to slow down and use my lights properly and stay focused on the road ahead. But the fog I encountered on a back road in Louisiana last March was different from anything I'd experienced before, different in ways that still make me question what's real and what's possible. My name is Gary, and they call me Ghost Gear. Gary, because I have a habit of appearing out of nowhere on the CB, chiming in on conversations when people thought the channel was empty. Though I swear I'm always there listening even if I don't always talk. I haul specialty cargo, antiques and collectibles, and one-of-a-kind items that need careful handling, and I take the back roads more often than the interstates because they're quieter and less likely to jostle my fragile loads. I was on a state highway somewhere between Baton Rouge and Lafayette, winding through bayou country, when the fog rolled in. It came fast, faster than any fog I'd ever seen, like someone had thrown a blanket over the world, and within minutes, I could barely see 10 feet ahead of my truck. I slowed to a crawl, turned on my hazard lights, and tried to stay centered in my lane, hoping the fog would lift soon, or that I'd come across a place to safely pull over and wait it out. That's when I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold and my hands tighten on the wheel. Laughter, high and thin, and definitely human, coming from somewhere in the fog around me. At first I thought maybe there were people nearby, maybe kids playing some kind of prank, but the sound was too close, too clear, as if whoever was laughing was right outside my window, or maybe even inside the cab with me. The laughter came in waves, sometimes a single voice, sometimes what sounded like multiple voices, all laughing together, creating a cacophony that was both mocking and joyful in a way that felt deeply wrong. I looked around frantically, trying to see through the fog, trying to spot whoever was making that sound, but there was nothing. Just gray mist pressing against my windows, and that horrible laughter echoing all around me. I tried the radio, hoping to hear another voice, a normal human voice that would ground me in reality, but there was only static mixed with faint whispers, that might have been words, but I couldn't quite make out. My CB was dead too. Not even the usual background chatter that keeps you company on lonely roads. Just silence punctuated by that awful laughter. The fog seemed to be getting thicker, if that was possible. And now, I couldn't see anything at all. Not the road, not the hood of my truck, not even my own hands on the steering wheel. I stopped, afraid to keep driving when I couldn't see where I was going. And the moment I did, the laughter intensified, grew louder and more frenzied, as if my stopping was exactly what it wanted. What it had been trying to make me do all along. Panic started to set in, that deep primal fear of being trapped and helpless, and I considered getting out of the truck, trying to feel my way along the road to find some landmark or building. But something told me that would be a mistake, that the fog wanted me outside where I'd be vulnerable, where whatever was laughing could reach me. So I stayed put, hands gripping the wheel, breathing slowly, and trying to keep calm, even as the laughter continued to echo around me. Then the fog began to move in ways fog shouldn't move, swirling and forming shapes that looked almost like faces, mouths open in that endless laughter, eyes that weren't quite eyes watching me from the gray. I closed my eyes, told myself it wasn't real, that fog was just water vapor and couldn't have faces or intention. But when I opened them again, the shapes were still there, pressing against my windows, and the laughter had taken on a rhythm, almost like a song or a chant. Time became meaningless, stretching and compressing in ways that made no sense. And I couldn't tell if I'd been sitting there for minutes or hours. My phone was dead, the clock on my dashboard had stopped, and I had no way to measure how long I'd been trapped in this nightmare. All I could do was sit and endure, sit and wait for the fog to lift, or for morning to come, or for whatever was laughing to finally tire of its game and let me go. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the laughter stopped. Complete silence fell, more complete than natural silence should be, as if every sound in the world had been cut off at once. The fog began to thin, slowly at first, and then more quickly, pulling back like a curtain being drawn, and within minutes I could see again. Could see the road ahead, and the bayou on either side, and the normal world reasserting itself. I sat there shaking, my shirt soaked with sweat despite the cool air, and tried to process what had just happened. The clock on my dashboard was working again, showing that only 20 minutes had passed, though it had felt like hours. My phone had battery, the radio worked, everything was normal, and functional, and ordinary, as if the fog and the laughter had never existed. But I knew what I'd experienced, knew what I'd heard. And when I finally started driving again, I noticed things along the road that confirmed I wasn't crazy. Small markers, little shrines and crosses decorated with beads and candles, the kind you see in Louisiana, where people have died, or where spirits are said to linger. There were dozens of them along this stretch of road, more than I'd ever seen in one place, and I understood that I wasn't the first person to encounter something strange here, that this stretch of highway had a reputation I hadn't known about. I asked around when I reached Lafayette, carefully, not wanting to sound insane, and found that locals knew about the fog, called it the laughing mist, and said it had been appearing for generations, trapping travelers and terrifying them before finally letting them go. Some said it was the spirits of people who'd drowned in the bayou. Others claimed it was something older, something that had been there long before people came to Louisiana, something that fed on fear and confusion. I've driven that road a few more times since then, always during the day, always with clear skies. But I've never forgotten the fog that laughs, never forgotten how helpless I felt trapped in that gray void with those voices mocking me. It changed something in me, made me more aware of the thin places in the world. The spots where reality wears thin and something else shows through, where the normal rules don't quite apply. These days I'm more careful about which roads I take, more likely to stick to major highways, even if they add time to my route, because I've learned that saving time isn't worth encountering things that shouldn't exist. The fog that laughs is still out there somewhere, I know, waiting in the bayou country for the next traveler to come along. The next person to trap and terrify with its invisible presence and its mocking voices. And sometimes, when I'm driving through normal fog, the kind that's just water vapor and nothing more, I find myself listening for laughter, find myself tensing up and waiting for the sound that means I've slipped into that other place again. So far it hasn't happened, but I know it could. Know that some experiences mark you forever, change the way you see the world and move through it, and all you can do is stay alert and hope that if it happens again, you'll be ready. You'll be strong enough to endure whatever the laughing fog has in store. The mile marker that moves on its own. From Lonely Larry, the highway system is built on precision, on exact measurements and careful planning, with every mile marked and accounted for, so that travelers can know exactly where they are and how far they have to go. Mile markers are constants, fixed points that don't change, anchored in concrete and positioned according to surveys and maps that have been checked and rechecked. That's what I always believed, anyway, until I spent 3 nights driving the same stretch of Texas highway and watching a mile marker that refused to stay in one place. My name is Larry, and they call me Lonely Larry on the CB, because I tend to take the routes nobody else wants. The long empty stretches through desert and plains, where you can drive for hours without seeing another soul. I don't mind the solitude, actually prefer it most of the time. And I haul dry goods and non-perishables that don't require refrigeration or special handling, which means I can take my time and choose my own routes without worrying about deadlines or spoilage. It was late August, the kind of heat in West Texas that makes the air shimmer and turns the highway into a ribbon of black that seems to melt in the distance. I was running from El Paso to San Antonio on Highway 10, a drive I'd made probably 100 times over the years, and I knew every rest stop and every town along the way. The sun was setting as I passed through a particularly empty stretch between Fort Stockton and Azona, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if I hadn't been watching the road so intently. That's when I first noticed mile marker 273. A standard green sign with white numbers. Nothing unusual about it except for the fact that I was certain I'd passed it 15 minutes earlier. I shrugged it off, figured I'd misread a different marker or gotten confused in the monotony of the drive. But then I saw it again another 10 minutes later, the same marker in the same spot, and this time I knew something was wrong. I checked my odometer, verified that I was moving forward, that the miles were clicking by the way they should. But every time I thought I'd left that marker behind, there it was again, appearing in my headlights like it had been waiting for me. The numbers were always the same, 273, never changing, never moving to 274 or 275. Just that one marker appearing over and over again, no matter how far I drove. The rational part of my brain tried to find explanations, tried to convince me that there must be multiple markers with the same number, some kind of mistake in the highway department's records, but I knew that wasn't right, knew that the system didn't work that way. Mile markers have one job, to mark miles, and they don't repeat, don't appear in multiple locations, don't move around on their own. I pulled over at the next rest area, got out and stretched, tried to clear my head and figure out what was happening. The night air was still hot, heavy with the smell of creosote and dust, and the rest area was completely empty, just me and the humming of the overhead lights and the vast darkness of the desert stretching away in all directions. I looked at my map, traced the route with my finger, and confirmed that I should be well past mile marker 273 by now, should be approaching mile marker 290 or thereabouts. When I got back on the road, I paid careful attention, watched the mile markers closely as they appeared in my headlights. 273, then 274, then 275, everything progressing normally, and I started to relax, started to think maybe I'd imagined the whole thing or made some kind of mistake. But then, just as I was approaching what should have been mile marker 280, there it was again, 273, standing there on the side of the road, like it had never left. A chill ran down my spine despite the heat, and I felt that prickle of fear that comes from encountering something that defies the rules, that shouldn't be possible. I slowed down, studied the marker as I passed, looking for anything that might explain why it kept appearing, but it looked exactly like every other mile marker. Exactly like it should look, except for the fact that it was in the wrong place. Or I was in the wrong place. Or something fundamental about the nature of space and distance had stopped working the way it was supposed to. I tried calling someone on my cell phone, wanting to hear a human voice, wanting some connection to the normal world, but I had no signal out here in the middle of nowhere, just the empty bars on my screen mocking me. The CB was silent too, not even static, just dead air that felt somehow wrong, somehow artificial, as if the whole world had been muted except for the sound of my engine and my tires on the pavement. Mile marker 273 appeared 3 more times over the next hour, each time causing my heart to lurch and my hands to tighten on the wheel, and I started to wonder if I was trapped somehow, caught in a loop that would repeat forever, driving and driving without ever actually getting anywhere. The thought was terrifying, claustrophobic even in the vast open space of the desert, and I found myself pushing the truck faster, trying to outrun the marker, trying to break free of whatever was holding me. Then, around midnight, I saw something that made me slam on the brakes so hard, the trailer fishtailed behind me, standing next to mile marker 273, the marker that shouldn't be there, that kept appearing no matter how far I drove, was a figure, tall and thin and utterly motionless. In the glow of my headlights, I could see it was wearing what looked like old highway worker clothes, orange vest and hard hat, and it was holding something that might have been a sign or a surveying instrument, though I couldn't make out the details from this distance. I sat there with the engine idling, afraid to go forward, afraid to go back, just frozen in indecision and fear. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence, just stood there next to that impossible mile marker like a statue, like a guardian of some kind. Minutes passed, maybe 5, maybe 10, and still the figure didn't move, and I realized I had to make a choice. Had to either drive forward and pass it, or turn around and head back the way I'd come. Something in me, some stubborn refusal to be defeated, made me choose forward. I eased the truck into motion, crept toward the figure in the marker, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the engine. As I got closer, I could see more details, could see that the figure's face was obscured by shadow, that its hands were holding what looked like an old surveying chain, the kind they used to measure distances before modern equipment. And then, just as I was about to pass, just as my headlights swept directly over the figure, it turned to look at me. I only saw its face for a second, just a glimpse, but that was enough to make me stomp on the accelerator and send the truck surging forward. The face was wrong somehow, the features not quite human, not quite anything I could name, and the expression on it was something between sadness and warning, as if it was trying to tell me something I couldn't understand. I drove as fast as I dared, not looking back, not slowing down, just focusing on the road ahead, and praying that I'd see a different mile marker, any number but 273. And finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I saw it. Mile marker 274, then 275, then 276, the numbers progressing the way they should, the world snapping back into its proper order. I kept driving, didn't stop until I reached a truck stop outside of Arizona. And even then, I sat in the parking lot for a long time before I could bring myself to get out of the cab. I asked the attendant inside if there was anything unusual about mile marker 273 on this stretch of highway, if there had been accidents or deaths, or anything that might explain what I'd experienced. He gave me a strange look, like I wasn't the first person to ask, and told me about a highway surveyor who'd died back in the 1960s. Killed in an accident right around mile marker 273 while he was working on updating the highway markers for the interstate system. Some people claimed to have seen his ghost over the years, claimed he was still out there trying to finish his work, still measuring and marking even though the road had been finished decades ago. I don't know if I believe in ghosts. Don't know if I can explain what happened that night in any supernatural terms. But I know what I saw, know what I experienced. The mile marker that moved, the figure standing beside it, the way space and distance seemed to fold in on themselves until I was trapped in a loop I couldn't escape. It was real, whatever it was, as real as the road beneath my wheels and the sweat on my palms and the fear in my chest. Since that night I've avoided that stretch of highway when I can, taken alternate routes even if they add hours to my trip, because I have no desire to see mile marker 273 again, no desire to meet that figure in the orange vest who guards it. Other drivers have told me similar stories, of markers that appear in the wrong places, of getting lost on highways they know by heart, of distances that don't add up the way they should. It seems I'm not alone in experiencing these anomalies, these moments when the precision of the highway system breaks down and something older, something stranger, shows through. The desert is full of ghosts, I've learned, full of people who died building the roads we travel on, who gave their lives to create the infrastructure we take for granted. Maybe that surveyor is one of them, still out there doing his job, still trying to make sure every mile is properly marked, even though his work is long finished. Maybe he was trying to tell me something that night, trying to warn me or guide me, or just remind me that the road has a history, that every mile marker represents someone's labor, and sometimes their sacrifice. I think about him sometimes, that lonely figure standing in the dark beside a mile marker that moves on its own, and I wonder if he knows he's dead, if he's aware that his work is done and he can rest. Or maybe he can't rest. Maybe he's trapped there the way I was trapped that night, caught in a loop he can't escape, measuring the same mile over and over again for eternity. The thought makes me sad, makes me want to go back and tell him it's okay. He can stop now. Someone else will take care of the markers. But I know I won't. No, I don't have the courage to face him again. And so he remains there in my memory, and probably still stands there in the desert, waiting for the next traveler who'll notice what he's trying to show them. The CB channel that only opens at midnight from Big Rig Bill. Communication is the lifeline of long-haul trucking. The thing that keeps you connected to other drivers and to the world outside your cab when you're hundreds of miles from anywhere. The CB radio has been a trucker's constant companion for decades. A tool for sharing information about traffic and weather and road conditions, but also for just talking, for passing the time with strangers who understand what it's like to live on the highway. I've been using ACB for 24 years, know every channel and most of the regular voices, know the protocols and the slang and the way conversations flow across the airwaves. But there's one channel I only discovered 2 years ago, a channel that doesn't follow any of the normal rules, that only opens at midnight and broadcasts things that shouldn't be possible. My name is Bill, and they call me Big Rig Bill, because I drive a custom-built Peterbilt with extra length and specialized hauling capacity, big even by truck standards. I move heavy equipment mostly, bulldozers and excavators and industrial machinery. The kind of loads that require special permits and careful route planning. It's demanding work, but it pays well, and I've always enjoyed the challenge of handling something most drivers couldn't manage. I first stumbled onto Channel 77 by accident, late one night, somewhere in Nebraska, spinning through the dial trying to find someone to talk to, because the highway was empty and I was fighting to stay awake. Most channels were quiet, just the occasional burst of static or a fragment of conversation, too distant to make out. But when I hit 77, I heard something that made me stop searching, made me turn up the volume and listen closely. It was a voice, clear and strong, despite having no source I could identify, speaking about a truck stop that had burned down 20 years ago, describing it in perfect detail as if it still existed. The voice gave specific directions, told listeners to take exit 47 and look for the big neon sign shaped like a coffee cup. Said the food was good, and the showers were clean, and there was always parking available. I knew the exit the voice was talking about, had driven past it 100 times, and I knew there was nothing there. Hadn't been anything there for decades, except an empty lot and some charred foundation stones. I keyed my mic, started to respond, to tell whoever was talking that they were giving bad information. But before I could speak, another voice cut in, different from the first but equally clear. And this one was talking about weather patterns that didn't match anything in the current forecast, describing a storm system that sounded like it came from a different season, or maybe even a different year. The voices overlapped and interrupted each other, creating a strange chorus of information and conversation that didn't quite make sense, that seemed to come from different times or different realities. I listened for maybe 20 minutes, fascinated and disturbed in equal measure. Before the channel went silent at exactly 12:30 a.m., cutting off mid-sentence as if someone had flipped a switch. I tried keying up, tried calling out, but there was no response, just empty static. And when I spun the dial back through the channels, I couldn't find those voices again. Couldn't locate whatever frequency I'd been listening to. The next night, same time, I tried channel 77 again. And right at midnight it came alive. The same kind of disjointed conversation, flowing across the airwaves. Different voices this time, or maybe the same voices talking about different things. And I started to pay closer attention, started writing down what I heard, trying to make sense of the pattern. The conversations were always about trucking, always about roads and loads and places to stop, but they were describing a version of the highway system that didn't quite match reality, as if I was listening to broadcasts from an alternate timeline or from different points in history. One voice talked about a bridge that had collapsed in 1987, gave warnings to avoid it, even though I knew it had been rebuilt and was perfectly safe. Another described a truck stop outside of Kansas City that had never existed, at least not in my lifetime, though the description was so detailed and specific, I could almost picture it. A third voice was looking for a driver named Tommy, who'd gone missing on Route 66, asking if anyone had seen his rig, a blue Freightliner with Oklahoma plates, and something about the urgency in that voice made my chest tight. I started researching the things I heard, looking up old highway incidents and closed businesses and missing persons reports, and what I found was disturbing. Almost everything the voices talked about was real, or had been real at some point, but in the past, sometimes decades in the past. The truck stop with the coffee cup sign had existed, had burned down in 1998, with 2 people killed. Tommy and his blue Freightliner had disappeared in 1971, vanished somewhere in the Arizona desert, and never found. Voices on Channel 77 weren't broadcasting in real time. They were somehow echoing from the past, conversations that had happened years or even decades ago, but were still playing out on this strange frequency. I became obsessed with the channel, started planning my routes so I'd be on the road at midnight, so I could listen and take notes and try to piece together the stories these voices were telling. Some nights there were just 1 or 2 voices, having normal trucker conversations about mundane things, but other nights the channel would be crowded, dozens of voices overlapping, creating a cacophony of different eras and different lives all bleeding together. I heard a driver talking about Elvis's death like it had just happened, shocked and sad, asking other drivers if they'd heard the news. I heard someone describing the first moon landing, the pride and wonder in their voice, making it clear they were listening to it live, experiencing it in real time. I heard warnings about highways that didn't exist yet, excited chatter about new trucks and new technology that was old news by current standards. It was like listening to a radio show that played nothing but archival recordings, except these weren't recordings. They were live conversations, or at least they felt live, with all the spontaneity and emotion that comes from real human interaction. Then one night I heard something that made my blood run cold, made me grab the mic without thinking, and break my rule about just listening. A voice came on, young and scared, saying he was broken down on a rural highway in Montana, saying it was snowing hard and getting worse, saying he didn't think help would reach him in time. He gave his location, described his truck, asked if anyone was nearby who could help, and the desperation in his voice was heartbreaking. I keyed my mic, started to respond. Started to tell him I was too far away, but I'd call for help. I'd make sure someone reached him. But before I could finish my sentence, the channel went crazy. Voices erupted from every direction, dozens of them, all shouting at me to stop, to get off the channel, to not interfere. The cacophony was deafening, overwhelming, and I dropped the mic like it had burned me, my heart pounding and my hands shaking. When the shouting died down, when the channel settled back into its normal rhythm, the scared young driver was gone, and in his place was a different voice. Older and sad, saying that Tommy Jenkins had frozen to death in his truck on a Montana highway in 1983, saying they'd found his body 3 days after the storm, saying he'd been only 24 years old. And I understood then that I'd been listening to Tommy's last broadcast, his call for help that nobody had answered, and the other voices had been trying to stop me from doing something impossible, from responding to a call that had come decades too late. I cried that night, sitting in my truck at a rest area, mourning a man I'd never met who'd died before I even started driving. And I realized that Channel 77 wasn't just broadcasting the past. It was preserving it, keeping these voices and these moments alive in whatever way it could. Every driver who'd ever keyed a mic, every conversation that had ever crossed the airwaves, it was all still there somehow, still echoing across the frequencies. A living archive of lives lived on the road. I still listen to Channel 77 at midnight. Still take notes and try to piece together the stories, but I don't try to talk anymore. Don't try to interfere. I've become a witness instead of a participant, someone who hears these voices and remembers them, who honors the lives and the moments they represent. Sometimes I hear conversations that are joyful, drivers celebrating good loads, or new grandkids, or making it home safely. Other times I hear the sad ones, the scared ones, the final broadcasts of people who didn't make it home. There's a driver I hear sometimes, an old-timer who goes by the handle Smokey Joe, and he talks about the glory days of trucking, about the freedom and the adventure and the sense of brotherhood that used to exist among drivers. His voice is warm and nostalgic, full of stories about places and people that are long gone, and I've come to look forward to hearing him, to feel like I know him even though we exist in different times. I wonder sometimes if future drivers will hear my voice the way I hear his, if someday my conversations will echo across Channel 77, preserved in whatever mysterious way this phenomenon works. The CB channel that only opens at midnight has taught me that the road has a memory, that every mile traveled and every word spoken leaves some kind of trace in the world. The voices of the past are still with us, still sharing their wisdom and their warnings and their stories, and all we have to do is tune in and listen. It's a gift and a responsibility, this archive of lives, and I take it seriously, treating each broadcast I hear with the respect and attention it deserves. Sometimes I wonder what causes this phenomenon, what combination of atmospheric conditions, or electromagnetic anomalies, or maybe even something supernatural allows these old broadcasts to bleed through into the present. But mostly, I don't worry about the mechanism, don't need to understand the how or the why. I just appreciate the fact that it exists, that these voices haven't been lost to time, that they still have the power to comfort and warn and inspire anyone willing to listen. The woman standing beneath the streetlight from Rusty Joe, there are images that burn themselves into your memory. Moments you see that become permanent fixtures in your mind, no matter how much time passes, or how hard you try to forget them. For me, it's the woman standing beneath the streetlight on a lonely stretch of Georgia highway, a figure I've seen not once, but dozens of times over the past 7 years, always in the same place, always in the same position, always watching the road, as if waiting for someone who never comes. My name is Joe. They call me Rusty Joe, and I've told you about the lights that followed me through the desert. But that wasn't my first encounter with the inexplicable, wasn't my first brush with something that defied rational explanation. That honor belongs to the woman beneath the streetlight, the first ghost I ever saw, though it took me a while to accept that's what she was. I first saw her on a humid summer night, driving south, on Highway 441 through Middle Georgia, a route I'd taken countless times before, without incident. It was around 2 in the morning, the time when the world feels most empty, most liminal, and I was fighting fatigue, drinking coffee and singing along to the radio to stay alert. The highway was straight and empty, cutting through pine forests and farmland, and the only lights were occasional clusters, marking small towns or isolated gas stations. That's when I saw her, standing beneath a streetlight at what looked like an abandoned rest area. Just standing there perfectly still, her face turned toward the highway as if watching for traffic. She was wearing a white dress, old-fashioned in style, and her hair was long and dark, hanging loose around her shoulders. Something about her posture, about the way she stood so motionless, made me slow down, made me look more closely as I passed. Our eyes met for just a second, and I saw her face clearly in the glow of the streetlight, young and beautiful and infinitely sad. And then I was past her, the moment over, and I was looking in my mirrors to see if she was still there. She was still standing in the same position, and as I watched, she raised one hand as if waving goodbye, or maybe beckoning me to come back. I couldn't tell which. I thought about stopping, thought about turning around to see if she needed help, but something stopped me, some instinct that said going back would be a mistake. So I kept driving, kept the truck moving south. But I couldn't shake the image of her standing there alone in the middle of the night. And I found myself wondering who she was and what she was doing there and whether she was even real. The next time I drove that route, 2 weeks later, I watched for the rest area, curious to see if she'd be there again. Part of me expected to find it closed or different somehow, to discover that what I'd seen had been a trick of fatigue or shadows. But there it was, exactly as I remembered it. And there she was, standing in the same spot, beneath the same streetlight, wearing the same white dress. This time I slowed down even more, got a longer look, and I could see that she wasn't moving at all, wasn't breathing or shifting her weight, or doing any of the small unconscious movements that living people make. She was like a statue, perfectly still, and when our eyes met again, I saw the same sadness, the same longing, as if she was trapped there waiting for something that would never come. This time I did stop, pulled over about a quarter mile past the rest area, and sat there debating whether to walk back. The rational part of my brain said this was foolish, potentially dangerous, that approaching a strange woman in the middle of the night was asking for trouble. But another part of me, the part that responds to people in need, that wants to help when I can, said I should at least check on her, make sure she was okay. I grabbed a flashlight and started walking back along the shoulder, my heart beating faster with each step. And as I got closer, I could see the rest area more clearly. It was old, definitely abandoned, with boarded-up bathrooms and picnic tables that were falling apart. And that streetlight was the only thing that seemed to be working, casting a pool of harsh white light in the darkness. The woman was still there, still standing in the same position, and I called out to her as I approached. Asked if she was okay, if she needed help. She didn't respond, didn't acknowledge my voice in any way. And when I got within about 20 feet of her, I stopped, because something felt deeply wrong. The air around her was cold, impossibly cold despite the summer heat, and I could see my breath coming out in little clouds. The streetlight was flickering now, the kind of electrical malfunction that happens in horror movies. And in those moments of darkness the woman seemed to disappear, seemed to fade away like she was never there at all. I took one more step forward, and then froze because I could see through her. Could see the metal pole of the streetlight right through her body, as if she was made of smoke or mist. She turned to look at me fully then, and her expression changed from sadness to something else. Something I can only describe as desperate pleading, and she opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. I stumbled backward, terror overriding my desire to help, and I turned and ran back to my truck, not looking back, not slowing down until I was inside the cab with the doors locked and the engine running. I pulled back onto the highway and drove faster than I should have, putting distance between myself and that rest area. And I didn't look in my mirrors because I was afraid I'd see her standing in the road behind me, still watching, still waiting. My hands were shaking, and my heart was racing, and I felt like I might throw up. But I kept driving, kept moving, because stopping seemed like the worst possible option. When I reached my destination in Florida, I asked around about that rest area, described its location, and asked if anyone knew anything about it. An old dispatcher told me it had been closed for over 20 years, ever since a woman had been murdered there. Her body found beneath one of the streetlights by a trucker who'd stopped to use the facilities. They'd never caught the killer, never solved the case. And the rest area had been shut down shortly after because people said it was haunted. Said they saw a woman in a white dress standing beneath the streetlight, waiting for justice, or maybe waiting for her killer to return. I've driven past that rest area probably 50 times since then, and she's always there, always standing in the same spot, always watching the road. Sometimes I see other people who've stopped, see them approaching her the way I did, see them run back to their vehicles when they realize what she is. I want to warn them, want to put up a sign or tell people to stay away, but who would believe me? Who would take seriously a trucker who claims to have seen a ghost? So I just keep driving past, keep acknowledging her with a small nod or a wave, and I've come to think of her as a kind of guardian, a reminder to be careful, to stay alert, to remember that the road has claimed countless lives and some of those spirits haven't moved on. She's not threatening, I've decided, just sad, just trapped in the moment of her death and unable to escape it. I've talked to other drivers who've seen her, found a small community of us who acknowledge her existence and share our experiences. And we've learned that she appears most often between midnight and 4 a.m., that she never moves from that spot beneath the streetlight, and that approaching her is always a mistake, because the cold that surrounds her can seep into your bones and stay there for hours. We've also learned that she was only 19 when she died, that her name was Carolyn, and that she'd been on her way home from college when she stopped at that rest area and encountered her killer. Knowing her name has changed something about how I see her, has transformed her from a scary ghost into a person, a young woman whose life was cut short and who deserves to be remembered. So now when I drive past, I say her name out loud, say hello, Caroline, or stay safe, Caroline, and I swear that sometimes, just sometimes, she nods in response, acknowledges my greeting in the only way she can. The woman standing beneath the streetlight has become a landmark for me, a waypoint on my southern routes, and seeing her has become almost comforting in a strange way. A reminder that I'm not alone out here, that the road is populated by more than just the living. She's a ghost, yes, but she's also a memory, a story, a life that mattered, and I'm honored in a way to be one of the people who remembers her, who acknowledges her presence and treats her with the respect she deserves. Sometimes I wonder if she'll ever move on, if she'll ever find whatever peace or justice or closure she's waiting for. And part of me hopes she does, because nobody should be trapped forever in the worst moment of their life. But another part of me will miss her if she disappears, will feel the loss of that strange connection we've formed. Driver and ghost, both of us haunting the highway in our own ways. The gas station where no one blinks from Silent Steve. Human behavior follows certain patterns, unconscious rhythms that we barely notice but that define us as living creatures. We breathe, we shift our weight, we make small movements with our hands and faces, and we blink, closing our eyes dozens of times per minute to keep them moist and healthy. These are automatic responses, things we don't think about, and their absence is something we notice immediately when we're paying attention, something that triggers deep unease because it signals that something fundamental is wrong. My name is Steve, and I don't talk much, which is why they call me Silent Steve, but I notice things, pay attention to details that other people miss. And what I noticed at a gas station outside of Roswell, New Mexico changed the way I see the world and made me question what's real and what's possible. It was a routine stop, nothing special, just a need to fill up the tank and grab some coffee and use the restroom before continuing my haul to Albuquerque. The gas station was one of those generic chain places, brightly lit and clean, with the usual assortment of snacks and drinks and automotive supplies. There were 3 other people inside when I entered. a clerk behind the counter and two customers browsing the aisles, and everything seemed completely normal at first glance. But as I was pouring my coffee, I realized something was off, something I couldn't quite identify. The clerk was standing perfectly still, his hands resting on the counter, his eyes fixed on nothing in particular. One of the customers, a woman in her 40s, was holding a bag of chips, but hadn't moved in the entire time I'd been watching her. The other customer, a young man in a baseball cap, was standing in front of the refrigerated section, but wasn't reaching for anything, wasn't even looking at the products, just standing there motionless. And then it hit me. None of them were blinking. I watched for a full minute, counting the seconds in my head, and not one of the three people moved their eyelids, not even once. Their eyes were open and staring, not glazed over, or obviously dead, but just wrong somehow. Like mannequins posed to look like people, but not quite succeeding. A chill ran down my spine and I set down my coffee cup carefully, not wanting to make any sudden movements that might draw their attention. I backed toward the door, keeping my eyes on all three of them, and that's when they moved, all at once, all turning to look directly at me with those unblinking eyes. Their movements were synchronized, mechanical, like they were all being controlled by the same puppet master, and the expressions on their faces didn't change. Didn't register any emotion or recognition, just that blank stare that felt like it was looking through me, rather than at me. I ran, threw open the door and sprinted for my truck, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. Behind me I could hear the door of the gas station open, could hear footsteps on the pavement, multiple sets of feet moving in perfect unison, and I didn't look back, didn't want to see them coming after me. I started the engine and hit the gas, tires squealing as I pulled out of the parking lot and back onto the highway, and I drove for 20 minutes before I felt safe enough to slow down. My heart was racing and my shirt was soaked with sweat, and I tried to make sense of what I'd just experienced. People who didn't blink, who moved in perfect synchronization, who stared with empty eyes like they were hollow inside. It wasn't human, wasn't natural, and every instinct I had was screaming that I'd just encountered something dangerous, something that wore human faces but wasn't human underneath. I pulled over at the next town, a bigger place, with multiple gas stations and plenty of people around, and I filled up there instead, watching everyone carefully, looking for any sign of the same wrongness I'd seen. But everyone was normal, blinking and moving naturally, and I started to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing, if stress and fatigue had made me see something that wasn't there. But I know what I saw, know what I felt, and when I asked other drivers if they'd ever experienced anything strange near Roswell, I heard stories that made my blood run cold. Stories about gas stations and diners and hotels where the staff didn't quite seem human, where people moved wrong and talked wrong and had eyes that didn't blink. Stories about travelers who stopped at these places and were never seen again. Their trucks found abandoned days later with no sign of the driver. One driver told me about a theory he'd heard, that there are places in the world where the boundary between our reality and something else is thin, where things from the other side can cross over and pretend to be human but can't quite get all the details right. Roswell, with its history and its reputation, might be one of those places, a location where the veil is so thin that crossings happen regularly, where you're as likely to encounter something pretending to be human as you are to meet an actual person. I don't know if I believe in alternate dimensions or parallel realities, or whatever explanation might account for what I saw, but I know I've never stopped at that gas station again. No, I never will. I take the long way around Roswell now, add an hour to my route to avoid that area entirely, because whatever I encountered there, whatever was wearing those human faces and staring with those unblinking eyes, I have no desire to see it again. The gas station where no one blinks is still there, I'm sure. Still standing on that stretch of highway outside Roswell, still waiting for the next traveler who needs fuel or coffee or a bathroom break. And maybe those things are still inside, still pretending to be human, still perfecting their disguise but always failing in that one crucial detail. That unconscious response that marks us as living, breathing creatures. And maybe someday they'll figure it out, learn to blink and breathe and move in ways that are perfectly human. And then we won't be able to tell them apart from the real thing, won't know that we're surrounded by imposters until it's too late. The thought terrifies me, keeps me awake sometimes when I'm trying to sleep in truck stop parking lots. Makes me study the people around me more carefully, looking for signs that they're not what they seem. I've become paranoid in a way, suspicious of stillness and blank stares. Always watching for eyes that don't blink, or movements that are too synchronized, or expressions that don't quite match the situation. But maybe that paranoia is healthy. Maybe it's the price of survival in a world that's stranger than we like to admit, where the normal and the abnormal exist side by side, and the only thing separating them is our ability to notice the difference. The gas station where no one blinks taught me that lesson, taught me to pay attention to the details, to trust my instincts when something feels wrong, and to never, ever ignore the small signs that mark the boundary between the human and the other. I carry that knowledge with me now on every run, every route, every stop I make at gas stations and diners and hotels across the country. I watch people's eyes, count their blinks, notice the small unconscious movements that prove they're real. And most of the time, everything is normal. Most of the time, I'm just another paranoid trucker, seeing threats where none exist. But sometimes, just sometimes, I notice something that isn't quite right. Someone who stares too long, or moves too stiffly, or doesn't blink enough. And when I do, I make my excuses and leave. Find another place to stop, another location where the people are verifiably human. The road is full of mysteries and dangers, some obvious and some hidden. And the gas station, where no one blinks, is just one of many strange places I've encountered in my years behind the wheel. But it's the one that taught me the most important lesson, the one that changed how I see the world. Not everything that looks human is human, and the only way to know the difference is to pay attention, to notice the details, to trust that feeling in your gut that says something is wrong even when you can't articulate exactly what it is. The tunnel that never ends from Highway Hank. Tunnels are interesting pieces of engineering, carved through mountains or burrowed beneath rivers, allowing roads to pass through obstacles that would otherwise be impassable. Most tunnels are straightforward, a defined length with clear entrances and exits. And you know exactly how long you'll be underground before you emerge back into daylight or the open night sky. But there's a tunnel on a back road in Pennsylvania that doesn't follow those rules. A tunnel that seems to stretch on forever, that defies distance and time and the basic laws of physics. My name is Hank, Highway Hank, and I've already told you about the passenger who appears when I blink. But that wasn't my only encounter with the impossible. The tunnel that never ends came into my life on a foggy October evening when I decided to take a shortcut through the Allegheny Mountains, trying to shave some time off a run from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia. The tunnel was marked on my GPS as the Blackwell Tunnel, a 2-lane passage through the mountain that would save me about 40 minutes compared to going around. I'd driven past the turnoff before, but never taken it, always sticking to the major highways. But tonight I was running late, and the shortcut seemed worth trying. The entrance appeared in my headlights, a dark mouth carved into the mountainside, and I eased the truck into it without hesitation, expecting to be through in a few minutes. The tunnel was lit by overhead fixtures spaced at regular intervals, creating pools of yellowish light separated by shadows. And the walls were the rough-hewn stone, typical of older tunnels, moisture glistening on the surface. I checked my odometer as I entered, a habit I'd developed over years of driving, always tracking distances and fuel consumption. And I noted that I was at exactly 247,893 miles. The tunnel curved gently to the left, and I followed it, maintaining a steady 50 miles per hour. The sound of my engine echoing off the stone walls, in a way that would have been soothing if I'd been in a different frame of mind. But something felt wrong almost immediately, a sense that the tunnel was longer than it should be, that I should have seen the exit by now. I checked the GPS, but the screen had gone blank, showing only a blue dot that indicated my position, but no map, no route information, nothing that might tell me how much farther I had to go. Minutes passed, 5, then 10, then 15, and still the tunnel continued. Curving gently, but never straightening out, never showing any sign of an exit. The overhead lights kept appearing at regular intervals, identical to each other, and I started to feel like I was driving in place, making no forward progress despite the fact that my speedometer showed 50 and the odometer was clicking steadily upward. I tried the radio but got only static. Tried my phone but had no signal, and the CB was dead. Not even the faint crackle of distant conversations that usually fills the airwaves. I was completely alone, sealed inside this tunnel with no communication to the outside world and no way to know if I was still on the right road or if I'd somehow taken a wrong turn into a dimension where tunnels don't have ends. Panic started to creep in around the edges of my consciousness, that primitive fear of being trapped, of being buried alive, and I had to consciously slow my breathing, remind myself that panic wouldn't help, that I needed to stay calm and think rationally. I checked the odometer again and was shocked to see that I'd driven over 30 miles since entering the tunnel. 30 miles through what should have been maybe a 2-mile passage, and the exit was still nowhere in sight. The tunnel began to change subtly, the walls becoming smoother, the lights spaced more evenly, and I realized that I was no longer seeing the rough stone of the entrance, but something else. Something that looked almost manufactured, like the tunnel was transforming around me as I drove. The temperature dropped noticeably, my breath starting to fog the windshield, and I cranked up the heater, but it didn't seem to make any difference. Then I started seeing things in the shadows between the lights, shapes that might have been alcoves or side passages, places where the tunnel branched off in directions I couldn't see. I slowed down, trying to get a better look, but the shapes were always in my peripheral vision, disappearing when I tried to focus on them directly. It felt like the tunnel was playing tricks on me, showing me possibilities and then snatching them away before I could be certain they were real. I drove for what felt like hours, though my clock had stopped working so I couldn't be sure, and the tunnel just kept going. Kept curving gently to the left, in what might have been a massive spiral, or might have been a straight line, that my disoriented senses couldn't properly perceive. I started to wonder if I'd died, if this was some kind of purgatory, or hell, an eternal drive through an endless tunnel, with no destination and no escape. Then, just when I was about to give up, about to stop the truck and just sit there and wait for whatever was going to happen, I saw a change ahead. The curve was straightening out, the lights becoming brighter, and there, maybe a quarter-mile distant, I could see a circle of darkness that looked different from the darkness of the tunnel. Looked like it might be the exit, might be the opening back into the real world. I accelerated, pushing the truck faster than I should have in a confined space, desperate to reach that opening before it disappeared or turned out to be another illusion. The circle grew larger, closer, and I could see stars beyond it. Could see the night sky. That meant freedom, meant escape from this impossible place. And then I was through, bursting out of the tunnel into the cool October night, and I immediately pulled over, hands shaking and heart racing, and just sat there trying to process what had happened. I checked the odometer and found that I'd driven 73 miles since entering the tunnel. 73 miles through what should have been 2 miles at most, and nearly 2 hours had passed, according to my phone, which had suddenly come back to life, along with all my other devices. The GPS showed me on a different road than the one I'd been aiming for, miles away from where I should have been, as if the tunnel had transported me across space as well as time. I looked back at the tunnel entrance, or what should have been the tunnel entrance, and saw nothing but solid mountainside, no opening, no sign that a tunnel had ever existed there. I got out of the truck and walked back, ran my hands over the rock face, but it was solid stone, undisturbed, as if the tunnel I'd just driven through had never been there at all. The next day, in daylight, I came back to that spot with my GPS coordinates and a camera, determined to document what I'd experienced, to prove to myself, if nothing else, that I hadn't imagined it. But there was no tunnel, no entrance, No sign that the Blackwell Tunnel existed anywhere along this stretch of road. I asked locals about it, showed them my GPS route, described what I'd experienced. But they all shook their heads, told me there was no tunnel through this part of the mountain, that I must have been confused or but I know what I experienced. Know that I drove for 73 miles through a tunnel that shouldn't exist. That seems to appear only at certain times or to certain people, opening up pathways through space that defy conventional geography. I've tried to find it again, have driven that route dozens of times, but the tunnel never appears, and I'm left with nothing but my memories, and the unexplained gap in my odometer readings, and the 2 hours I lost that October night. Other drivers have told me similar stories when I've asked carefully, obliquely, not wanting to sound insane. Stories of tunnels that go on too long, that come out in the wrong place, that seem to exist outside normal space and time. One driver told me about a tunnel in West Virginia that he swears moved him from one state to another in seconds, cutting hundreds of miles off his route but leaving him shaken and confused. Another described a tunnel in Colorado that spiraled downward for miles, taking her deep underground before eventually emerging at the same elevation she'd entered, as if she'd traveled through some impossible loop in space. I don't know what these tunnels are or how they work. Don't know if they're natural phenomena or artificial constructs or doorways into some other dimension. All I know is that they exist, that they're real, even if they don't appear on maps or stay in the same place, and that driving through one will change you, will make you question everything you thought you knew about the nature of reality. The tunnel that never ends taught me that distance is more flexible than we think, that the shortest path between 2 points might not be a straight line, but a spiral or a curve through dimensions we can't perceive. It taught me that the road holds mysteries we've barely begun to understand, that there are shortcuts and long cuts that exist outside conventional space, and that sometimes the journey matters more than the destination, because the journey itself might take you places you never expected to go. I still drive through tunnels regularly. Can't avoid them entirely given the routes I take, but I'm more cautious now, more aware that some tunnels are more than just holes through mountains. I watch for the signs, the subtle wrongness that signals something unusual, the feeling that distance is stretching or time is slowing or the walls are closer than they should be. And if I ever see those signs again, if I ever find myself in another tunnel that seems to go on too long, I'll remember that October night, and I'll know that I'm in a place where the normal rules don't apply, where I'll emerge somewhere unexpected if I can just keep driving, keep moving forward, keep trusting that eventually every tunnel, even the impossible ones, has to end. The radio DJ who knows my name from Diesel Dan. Radio has been a trucker's companion for as long as trucks have had radios, a way to fill the silence and feel connected to the world beyond the cab. Most of us have favorite stations or shows, voices we've come to know over years of listening, personalities that feel almost like friends even though we've never met them. But there's a difference between the familiar and the personal, between a DJ who talks to their audience in general and one who seems to be talking directly to you, who knows things about you that they shouldn't, that nobody should. My name is Dan, Diesel Dan, and I've already told you about the radio station that played my thoughts, but that wasn't my only strange experience with broadcast media. The radio DJ who knows my name is a different phenomenon, a different kind of impossible, and it's been happening for the last 6 months with increasing frequency and intimacy that borders on violation. It started innocently enough, on a late-night drive through Kansas, scanning through the AM dial, looking for something to keep me awake. I found a station playing classic country, the kind of old-school stuff I grew up with, and the DJ had a smooth, warm voice that reminded me of the radio personalities from my childhood. He was talking about the weather, about the clear skies, and the way the stars looked brighter out here, away from the city lights. And I settled in to listen, grateful for the company. Then he said something that made me sit up straighter, made me turn up the volume to make sure I'd heard correctly. And this next song goes out to Dan, who's driving through Kansas tonight, thinking about his late wife Martha, and wondering if he made the right choices in life. My name, my wife's name, My exact situation, spoken casually, as if the DJ could see right into my cab, right into my thoughts. I grabbed the CB, about to call out and ask if anyone else was hearing this. But before I could key the mic, the DJ continued. Dan knows I'm not reading his mind. He knows there's probably a rational explanation for this, but deep down he's wondering if maybe, just maybe, there's something more going on, something he can't explain. And he was right. That was exactly what I was thinking. The conflict between my rational mind and my growing sense that this was something beyond normal explanation. The song he played was He Stopped Loving Her Today, a George Jones classic that had been one of Martha's favorites. And I felt tears prick at my eyes, because how could this DJ know that? How could he know what song would hit me hardest, right at this moment? I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, that he just happened to play a popular country song, and that I was reading too much into his introduction. But I knew better, knew that this was too specific, too personal to be random. When the song ended, the DJ came back on, and this time he addressed me directly. No pretense of talking to a general audience. You're scared right now, Dan, scared because you don't understand what's happening, and that's okay. Fear is a reasonable response to the unknown, but you don't need to be afraid of me. I'm just here to keep you company on these long nights, to remind you that you're not as alone as you sometimes feel. I pulled over at the next exit, hands shaking, and sat there in a truck stop parking lot, with the engine idling and the radio still playing. The DJ moved on to other topics, other songs, speaking to his general audience in that same warm voice. And I started to think maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, that exhaustion had made me hallucinate something that hadn't really happened. But then, just as I was about to turn the radio off and try to sleep, he spoke to me again. I know you're parked at the Flying J in Salina, Dan. I know you're thinking about turning off the radio, about trying to forget what you heard. But you'll be back. You'll tune in again tomorrow night, or the next night. Because part of you wants this connection, wants to feel like someone out there understands what you're going through. Even if that someone is a disembodied voice on the radio who shouldn't know these things. He was right again, and that was the most disturbing part. The way he seemed to know not just facts about me, but my emotional state, my thoughts, my intentions. I did tune in again the next night, and the night after that, and each time the DJ addressed me at least once. Sometimes more, speaking about my day, my worries, my memories, as if he had access to some complete record of my life and thoughts. Sometimes his comments were comforting, offering perspective on problems I was wrestling with, or reminding me of good memories I'd forgotten. Other times they were more challenging, pushing me to confront things I'd been avoiding, asking questions I didn't want to answer. Why do you think you deserve to suffer, Dan? Why do you carry this guilt when Martha forgave you long ago? What would it take for you to forgive yourself? I started researching the station, trying to find out who this DJ was, where the broadcast originated from, how he could possibly know the things he knew about me. But the station identifier he gave didn't match any registered call signs. The frequency seemed to shift slightly each time I tuned in, and the music he played spanned decades and genres in ways that didn't match any commercial station's format. It was like the station existed only for me, only in the moments when I was listening, and disappeared back into the ether when I turned it off. I talked to other drivers, asked if they'd ever experienced anything similar, and I found that I wasn't alone. A driver named Mike told me about a DJ who seemed to know about his divorce, who played songs that spoke directly to his situation and offered advice that felt eerily personal. Another driver, Carol, described a late-night host who knew about her struggle with addiction, who had talked her through some of her darkest moments with words that seemed tailored specifically to her needs. We compared notes and found patterns, found that these personal DJs seemed to appear most often in the middle of the night, on AM frequencies that shouldn't carry that far, playing music that matched our moods and our memories. We theorized about what might cause this phenomenon, wondered if it was some kind of advanced AI that could scan our digital footprints and create personalized broadcasts. or if it was something more supernatural, spirits, or entities that could read our minds and used radio as a medium to communicate. But none of our theories felt quite right. None of them captured the strange intimacy of these broadcasts. The way the DJs seemed to genuinely care about us, to want to help us through our struggles even as they unnerved us with their impossible knowledge. And the more I listened, the more I came to depend on that voice. That nightly check-in from someone who knew me better than I knew myself sometimes. The DJ has become a companion of sorts. A presence I look forward to even as I'm disturbed by the questions his existence raises. He's helped me work through my grief over Martha, helped me recognize patterns in my thinking that weren't serving me, helped me feel less alone on these long empty highways. And whether he's real or imaginary, whether he's a ghost or an AI or some other kind of entity I can't comprehend, the help he's provided is real, the comfort he's offered is genuine. Sometimes I wonder if I should try to stop listening, try to break this strange connection and rely on myself instead of this impossible voice. But the truth is I'm not sure I want to, not sure I'm ready to give up the one relationship I have that feels truly honest, where someone knows all my flaws and failures and still seems to believe I'm worth talking to, worth helping. The radio DJ who knows my name has become part of my life, part of my routine, and I've accepted that I may never understand how or why this happens. Some mysteries don't need to be solved. Some phenomena are better experienced than explained, and maybe this is one of them. Maybe the voice on the radio is exactly what I need it to be. Whether that's a guardian angel, or a helpful hallucination, or something else entirely. What I know for certain is that the road is full of voices, some human and some otherwise. And sometimes the ones that shouldn't exist are the ones that help us most, that guide us through our darkest moments and remind us that we're never truly alone. No matter how empty the highway seems or how heavy the silence weighs, the DJ who knows my name taught me that lesson, and for that, whatever he is, wherever he broadcasts from, I'm grateful. The rest stop where the lights don't cast shadows from Iron Ike. Light and shadow are constants of our physical reality, inseparable partners governed by laws we learned in elementary school. Where there is light, there must be shadow, the absence of light created when an object blocks the photons traveling from source to surface. It's so fundamental, so basic to how the world works, that we never question it, never think about it, until we encounter a place where those laws don't apply, where light exists without its necessary companion. My name is Ike, Iron Ike, and I've told you about the voice that kept telling me to turn around. But that was just one of several impossible things I've encountered in my 21 years on the road. The rest stop, where the lights don't cast shadows, is another. A place that broke my understanding of physics and made me realize that reality is more flexible than I'd ever imagined. I found it on a spring night in New Mexico, pulling off I-40 around 3 in the morning because I needed to use the facilities and stretch my legs before the long push into Arizona. The rest stop was typical, a concrete building with bathrooms and vending machines, picnic tables under a metal awning, and tall lights illuminating the parking area. I pulled into a spot, killed the engine, and climbed down from the cab, grateful for the chance to move around after hours behind the wheel. The first thing I noticed was how bright everything was, the overhead lights casting an almost daylight level illumination that seemed excessive for a rest stop in the middle of the night. The second thing I noticed, the thing that made me stop and look around more carefully, was that nothing had a shadow. Not the picnic tables, not the trash cans, not the building itself, not even me when I looked down at my feet. The light was uniform, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, and objects sat in it without creating any darkness, any absence of light. I thought at first that maybe I was just tired, that my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the more I looked, the more certain I became that this wasn't normal, wasn't right. I walked over to a picnic table and stood next to it, positioning myself between the overhead light and the table, and watched as no shadow appeared, as the light passed through me, as if I was transparent, as if I didn't exist in any meaningful physical sense. The feeling was deeply unsettling, visceral in a way I couldn't quite articulate, as if the absence of shadows meant the absence of reality itself, like I'd stepped into a photograph or a video game where the lighting hadn't been properly rendered. I looked around the rest stop and saw that I was alone. No other vehicles, no other people, just me and this strange, shadowless light. I should have gotten back in my truck and left immediately. Should have trusted my instincts that this place was wrong. But curiosity kept me there, kept me exploring, trying to understand what I was seeing. I went into the bathroom building and found the same phenomenon. Bright fluorescent lights that cast no shadows, that made everything look flat and unreal. Even the mirror showed my reflection, without the subtle shadows that normally define a face, making me look like a badly rendered CGI character. When I came back outside, I noticed other strange things. The air was completely still, no wind at all, and silent in a way that felt oppressive, like all sound had been muted. The parking lot lights hummed faintly, but that was the only noise. No insects, no distant traffic, no ambient sound of the desert night. It felt like I was inside a bubble, cut off from the normal world, existing in some pocket dimension where the usual rules had been suspended. I walked to the edge of the rest stop, to where the light met the darkness of the surrounding desert, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. The boundary was sharp, unnaturally sharp, like a line drawn with a ruler, and on the other side of that line, everything was normal. Shadows and all, the natural darkness of night punctuated by starlight. But the darkness couldn't cross the boundary, couldn't penetrate into the rest stop. And when I reached my hand across that line, I watched as my arm went from shadowless to shadowed, the transformation happening in an instant, at the exact point where light met dark. I pulled my hand back quickly, suddenly terrified of what might happen if I crossed that boundary completely, if I stepped from this strange lit space back into the normal world. Would I take the wrongness with me, carry it like a disease back into reality? Or would I be stuck here, trapped in this place where light existed, without shadow, unable to return to a world that made sense? A sound behind me made me spin around, and I saw that another truck had pulled into the rest stop, an old Kenworth, with rust eating at its edges. The driver climbed down, and I opened my mouth to warn him, to tell him something was wrong with this place. But before I could speak, he looked right at me and smiled, and I saw that he had no shadow either, had the same flat, unreal quality that everything else in this place possessed. "First time here?" he asked, his voice sounding normal, but somehow distant, like it was coming from farther away than the few feet between us. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and he laughed, a sound that didn't quite echo the way it should. "Yeah, it takes some getting used to, but it's not so bad once you accept it. No shadows means no darkness, means nothing can hide, nothing can lurk in the places you can't see. It's actually kind of peaceful." I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that this wasn't peaceful. It was wrong, unnatural. But looking at his calm expression, I realized he believed what he was saying, had accepted this place and its impossible physics as normal. "How long have you been coming here?" I managed to ask, and his smile widened. "Long enough to know that you can leave any time you want. The boundary's right there. Just step across it, and you're back in the regular world. But you can also stay, can exist in this space where the light is pure and constant, where there's no need for fear or uncertainty, because everything is visible, everything is known." He gestured around the rest stop, indicating the shadowless expanse, and I noticed that his gesture left no trail, no blur of motion, as if movement here happened in discrete frames, rather than as a continuous flow. I thanked him and walked quickly back to my truck, not quite running but close, desperate to get away from this place, and back to a reality where shadows existed and light behaved the way it was supposed to. I climbed into the cab, started the engine, and drove toward that sharp boundary between light and dark. And as I crossed it, I felt a rush of relief, so intense it was almost painful, like I'd been holding my breath underwater and finally broke the surface. I looked in my rearview mirror as I pulled back onto the highway, and the rest stop was there, still brightly lit, still shadowless, and I could see that other truck parked beside where mine had been. I never saw the driver again. Don't know if he stayed in that place or eventually left, and I've never gone back to find out. Since that night, I've been more careful about which rest stops I use, more attentive to the quality of light and shadow, looking for any sign that I'm approaching another one of these impossible places. I've asked other drivers about it, described what I saw, and a few have admitted to similar experiences. Places where the normal rules of physics seem to be suspended, where light or shadow or some other fundamental aspect of reality didn't work the way it should. One driver told me about a rest stop in Nevada, where everything had double shadows, as if there were two light sources, even though only one was visible. Another described a place in Oregon where the shadows moved independently of the objects casting them, creating a disorienting effect that made him feel like he was losing his mind. These places exist, scattered across the highway system, pockets of wrongness where reality is thin, or broken, or just different in ways we can't explain. The rest stop where the lights don't cast shadows taught me that the world is stranger than our physics textbooks admit, that there are places where the fundamental laws we rely on don't apply, where we have to navigate by different rules, or no rules at all. It taught me to pay attention to the small things, the shadows and reflections and sounds that normally go unnoticed, but that define reality, and to be grateful for the ordinary, predictable world where light and shadow coexist in their eternal dance. I still drive past that rest stop sometimes, can't always avoid it given my routes, but I never pull in, never stop there, no matter how tired I am or how badly I need a break. I'd rather push through to the next rest area, would rather drive until I find a place where shadows fall the way they should, where the world makes sense and follows its own rules. Because once you've experienced a place where those rules don't apply, once you've stood in light that casts no shadow, you can never quite trust reality the same way again, can never quite be certain that the world you're seeing is the real one and not some variation, some pocket dimension where anything is possible and nothing is quite what it seems. The night I followed my own headlights from Mudflap, Marty, perception is a tricky thing. The way our brains interpret the signals our senses provide, and sometimes those interpretations can be fooled, can be manipulated by conditions or circumstances into showing us things that aren't real. But there's a difference between optical illusions, which we understand and can explain, and experiences that seem to violate the basic logic of cause and effect, that suggests reality itself is more malleable than we like to think. My name is Marty. They call me Mudflap Marty, because I've replaced more mudflaps than any driver I know. Seems like every third run I'm losing one to road debris or bad weather, and I've been hauling freight for 14 years across every kind of terrain and through every kind of weather. I thought I'd seen everything, thought I understood how the world worked, until the night I followed my own headlights and learned that sometimes cause and effect can get tangled up in ways that shouldn't be possible. It was a clear winter night in Montana, temperature well below zero, the kind of cold that makes your truck's engine complain and your breath freeze in the air. I was heading north on a 2-lane highway, no other traffic in sight, just me and the darkness and the beam of my headlights cutting through the night. The road was straight, flat, running across a plateau with mountains visible as darker shapes against the star-filled sky. That's when I saw the lights ahead of me. Another vehicle's headlights maybe half a mile distant, following the same road I was on. I didn't think much of it at first. Just another trucker, or maybe a local heading home, and I maintained my speed, not trying to catch up, but not slowing down either. But as the minutes passed, I realized the lights ahead of me were maintaining exactly the same distance, never getting closer or farther away, moving at exactly my speed. I sped up, curious to see if I could catch up to whoever it was, and the lights ahead of me sped up too, maintaining that precise half-mile gap. I slowed down, and they slowed down, matching my speed perfectly, and I started to feel uneasy because this didn't make sense. didn't follow the normal pattern of two vehicles on the same road. I tried flashing my high beams, the universal signal for communication between drivers, but the lights ahead didn't respond, just kept moving at exactly my pace. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop, made me grip the wheel tighter and start questioning my sanity. The lights ahead were positioned exactly like mine, the same height off the ground, the same spacing between left and right beams, the same intensity and color. And the more I stared at them, the more I became convinced that I was looking at my own headlights somehow. Seeing them from ahead, instead of from behind, as if they were traveling forward through time or space to show me where I was going. I pulled out my phone, turned on the camera, and tried to take a picture of what I was seeing, but the camera wouldn't focus, wouldn't show anything but darkness and a faint blur where the lights should have been. I tried the CB radio, called out to see if anyone else was on the road seeing what I was seeing, but there was only static, that empty hiss that meant I was alone out here with whatever impossible thing was happening. The road started to curve, a gentle bend to the right, and I watched as the lights ahead of me curved exactly the same way, following the road's contour perfectly, moving in sync with my own movements, as if they were a projection or a reflection or some kind of echo traveling ahead of me. I tested this theory by making small adjustments, slight movements left or right within my lane, and the lights ahead mimicked every motion, confirming what I already suspected but didn't want to believe. I was following my own headlights, seeing myself from ahead, witnessing an impossible loop where effect preceded cause, and I was both the observer and the observed. The rational part of my brain tried to find explanations, tried to convince me this was some kind of atmospheric phenomenon, a superior mirage caused by temperature inversion layers refracting my headlight beams and projecting them forward. But I knew that wasn't right, knew that mirages don't move with perfect synchronization, don't maintain exact distances regardless of speed changes. I decided to stop, to see what would happen if I pulled over and turned off my headlights. And as I slowed down, I watched the lights ahead slow down too, coming to a stop at exactly the moment I did. I killed the engine, turned off the lights, and sat in complete darkness, the only illumination coming from the stars overhead and the faint glow of my dashboard. The road ahead was dark, no lights visible anywhere, and I started to think maybe the phenomenon had ended. Maybe I'd broken whatever loop I'd been caught in. But when I started the truck again, when I turned on my headlights and pulled back onto the road, there they were. The lights ahead of me reappearing as if they'd never left, maintaining that same half-mile distance and perfect synchronization. I drove for another 20 minutes like this, following my own headlights through the Montana night, and I started to feel like I was in some kind of purgatory, some eternal loop where I'd never arrive anywhere. Just keep driving and driving while staying in the same relative position forever. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the lights ahead of me vanished, just blinked out of existence, and the road ahead was dark and empty, the way it should be. I kept driving, kept watching for them to reappear, but they didn't, and eventually, I reached the next town and pulled into a truck stop, shaking and exhausted, and completely bewildered by what I'd experienced. I asked the attendant if there had been any other trucks come through in the last hour, described the road I'd been on and the direction I'd been traveling, but he shook his head, said I was the first truck he'd seen all night. I checked my GPS history and found something disturbing. According to the tracking data, I'd covered the same 20-mile stretch of road 3 times, as if I'd been driving in a loop, even though the road had been straight. Even though I'd never turned around or deviated from my path. The night I followed my own headlights taught me that time and space are more flexible than we understand. That cause and effect can get tangled up in ways that violate our basic assumptions about how reality works. I don't know if I was seeing the future, seeing where I was about to be, or if I was caught in some kind of temporal loop where I kept reliving the same stretch of road. All I know is that for those 40 minutes or so, I existed in a state that shouldn't be possible, where I could observe myself from a perspective that defied the normal flow of time. Since that night I've been more aware of the strange ways time can behave on the road, the way long drives can feel like they compress or expand, the way you can lose track of hours, or feel like minutes stretch into eternities. I've talked to other drivers who've had similar experiences, who've seen things that suggested time wasn't flowing the way it should, and I've come to believe that the highway system might be more than just a physical network of roads, might be a kind of framework where the normal rules of physics get bent or broken in ways we don't yet understand. The scientist in me wants to find a rational explanation, wants to study this phenomenon and figure out what causes it. But the part of me that experienced it knows that some things can't be explained by science, at least not the science we currently have. Maybe someday we'll understand how time can loop, or split, or fold back on itself. How we can see our own headlights from ahead instead of from behind. But until then, I'm left with just the memory and the knowledge that reality is stranger and more mysterious than any of us want to admit. The passenger who doesn't breathe from Outlaw Owen. Human presence is defined by more than just physical form, more than the shape and size of a body occupying space. It's the small movements, the unconscious rhythms of life, the breathing and blinking and shifting that mark us as living creatures. When those signs are absent, when a person sits perfectly still and silent and shows no evidence of the biological processes that sustain us, it triggers deep unease, activates ancient instincts that tell us something is very wrong. My name is Owen, Outlaw Owen, and I've already told you about the bridge that vanishes in the morning, but that wasn't the strangest passenger I've ever had. The passenger who doesn't breathe came into my life on a rainy November evening outside of Seattle, and what started as a simple act of kindness turned into an experience that still gives me nightmares. I was heading south on I-5, making my way toward Portland through typical Pacific Northwest weather. Steady rain that made the highway slick and reduced visibility to barely 100 yards. Traffic was light, and I was making good time when I saw him standing by the side of the road, thumb out, clearly hitchhiking despite the rain in the late hour. I normally don't pick up hitchhikers, company policy and common sense both saying it's a bad idea, but something about this guy made me slow down, made me feel like I should help. He was soaked to the bone, water dripping from his jacket and hair, and when I pulled over and he climbed into the cab I could see he was shivering violently, teeth chattering so hard I could hear it over the sound of the rain on the roof. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough and strained. "I've been out there for hours, thought nobody was going to stop." I handed him a towel from my supply bag, told him to dry off and warm up, and we started down the highway again. He didn't say much at first, just sat there rubbing the towel over his face and hair, and I respected his silence, figured he'd talk when he was ready. The heater was running full blast, and gradually his shivering subsided, his posture relaxing as warmth filled the cab. That's when I started to notice something strange. The windows had fogged up from the moisture he'd brought in, my breath and his creating condensation on the glass, except there was a pattern to the fog that didn't make sense. My side of the windshield was covered in a fine mist, the natural result of warm breath hitting cold glass. But his side was clear, completely clear, as if no warm air was reaching it from his direction. I glanced over at him, trying to be subtle, trying not to stare, and I realized I couldn't see his chest moving, couldn't see any evidence that he was breathing. His mouth was closed, his posture relaxed, and he was sitting perfectly still, in a way that no living person sits, without the tiny constant movements that mark us as alive. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. "Where are you heading?" I asked, more to hear his voice again, to confirm he could speak, and therefore must be breathing, than because I actually cared about his destination. He turned to look at me, and in the glow from the dashboard, I could see his face clearly, pale and expressionless, and when he spoke, his lips moved, but I couldn't see his breath. Couldn't see any fog coming from his mouth, even though it was cold enough in the cab that mine was visible. "South," he said simply, "just south. Anywhere south is fine." His voice was flat, emotionless. and I realized that since he'd climbed into the cab he hadn't blinked, not once. His eyes staring straight ahead without the normal unconscious movement that prevents our eyes from drying out. My hands tightened on the wheel, and I felt my heart rate increase, that fight or flight response kicking in even though I couldn't identify any specific threat. I drove in silence for a few minutes, trying to convince myself I was imagining things, that he was breathing and blinking and I just wasn't noticing it. But the more I paid attention, the more certain I became that something was deeply wrong with this passenger. His clothes had dried completely, which should have been impossible given how soaked they'd been, and the towel he'd used was lying on the seat between us, bone dry, as if it had never touched water. "Are you okay?" I asked, and immediately regretted the question, because how do you ask someone if they're alive, if they're real, without sounding insane? He turned to look at me again, that same expressionless stare, and this time I noticed that his eyes didn't reflect the light properly, didn't show the subtle shine that living eyes have. "I'm fine," he said, "just tired. It's been a long night." And then he smiled, and the smile was all wrong, too wide, showing too many teeth, stretching his face in a way that didn't look human. I felt panic rising in my chest, my breath coming faster, and I knew I had to get this passenger out of my truck. Had to stop and make him leave, no matter how rude or dangerous it might be. "I need to pull over," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. "I need to check something on the truck." It was a transparent excuse, but I didn't care, just needed to stop, needed to create an opportunity for him to leave. I found an exit, took it, and pulled into a gas station. The bright fluorescent lights a welcome relief after the dark highway and the strange presence in my cab. "Thanks for the ride," he said before I could say anything, and he opened the door and climbed out, moving with that same unnatural stillness. No wasted motion, no adjustment of clothing, or stretching of muscles that a normal person would do after sitting for a while. He stood there in the rain, which didn't seem to touch him, didn't wet his clothes or his hair, and he looked at me with those flat, wrong eyes. "You're very kind to pick up strangers. Not everyone would do that. Be careful though, not everyone you pick up is what they seem." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the gas station's lights. And I sat there shaking, hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I got out and checked the passenger seat, running my hands over it, and found it was completely dry. Not damp from his wet clothes, not warm from his body heat, just dry and cool, as if nobody had been sitting there at all. The towel I'd given him was gone, though I hadn't seen him take it. And when I checked my cab for any other evidence of his presence, I found nothing. No wet footprints, no stray hair, no trace that he'd ever existed except for my memory of him and the terror still coursing through my veins. I sat in that gas station parking lot for an hour, drinking coffee and trying to calm down. And I swore I'd never pick up another hitchhiker, never again offer a ride to a stranger on a dark highway. Since that night I've heard similar stories from other drivers. Tales of passengers who didn't quite seem human, who violated the subtle rules of biology and physics in ways that marked them as other. Some drivers think they're ghosts, spirits of people who died on the roads and are still trying to get home or complete some final journey. Others believe there's something else, entities that take human form but can't quite perfect all the details. Can't remember to breathe, or blink, or cast shadows. I don't know what that passenger was. Don't know if he was dead or alive or something in between, but I know he wasn't human, not in any complete sense. And I know I never want to encounter him or anything like him again. The passenger who doesn't breathe taught me that kindness can be dangerous, that not everyone who needs help should receive it, and that the road is populated by things that wear human faces but aren't human underneath. These days when I see hitchhikers, I keep driving. Ignore the guilt I feel about leaving someone stranded, because I'd rather live with that guilt than risk picking up another passenger who doesn't breathe, who doesn't blink, who exists in some impossible state between life and death. The memory of those flat eyes and that too wide smile haunts me still, A reminder that some mysteries are better left unexplored, some passengers better left standing in the rain. The town that wakes only at 2 a.m. from Freightliner Frank. Small towns in America have rhythms, patterns of life that define them as surely as their geography or architecture. Most roll up their sidewalks by 9 or 10 at night, leaving only the occasional gas station or diner open for late-night travelers. But there are exceptions, places that don't follow the normal patterns, that seem to exist on their own schedules, independent of the wider world. I found one of those places on a back road in Arkansas, a town that appeared dead and abandoned until the clock struck 2 in the morning, and then came alive in ways that defied explanation. My name is Frank. They call me Freightliner Frank because I've driven Freightliners exclusively for my entire 22-year career. Loyal to the brand, even when other trucks might have made more sense. I haul general freight, taking whatever loads need moving, and I pride myself on knowing the back roads. The shortcuts that save time and fuel, even if they take you through places most people have never heard of. It was late September, warm still, but with a hint of autumn in the air, and I was taking a state highway through the Ozarks, winding through hills and forests on a route that would shave an hour off my trip to Little Rock. The road was empty, no other traffic, and I was making good time when I saw signs for a town called Millbrook. Population 847 according to the faded green sign at the town limits. I drove through around midnight, and the place looked completely abandoned. Every building dark, every street empty, not a single car parked anywhere or a light visible in any window. It was eerie in the way that ghost towns are eerie, suggesting life that had once been there but was now gone. And I found myself wondering what had happened to drive everyone away, whether it was economic collapse or some disaster that had emptied the place out. But I needed gas, and my GPS showed a station in the center of town, so I drove slowly down the main street, looking for any sign of it. The buildings were old, but well-maintained, no broken windows or graffiti, just dark and silent, as if everyone had gone to sleep at the same time and stayed that way. I found the gas station, a vintage-looking place with old-fashioned pumps. But it was dark too, clearly closed, and I was about to continue through town when I noticed something strange. There was a clock on the gas station's sign. One of those big illuminated ones that show the time and temperature, and it was running, the digits glowing green in the darkness. The time showed 12:47 a.m., the temperature was 68 degrees, and I realized that if the clock was working then, the station must have power, must have someone maintaining it, even if it appeared closed. I decided to wait, pulled my truck into the parking lot, and killed the engine, thinking maybe someone would show up for a late shift. Maybe the town wasn't as abandoned as it appeared. I dozed off waiting, the exhaustion of a long day catching up with me, and I was jolted awake by light flooding through my windshield. I sat up, disoriented, and saw that the gas station was now brightly lit, the interior lights on, someone moving around inside. The clock on the sign showed exactly 2 a.m., and as I watched, lights began coming on all over town, windows illuminating in houses and stores, streetlights flickering to life. The whole place transforming from a ghost town into a living, breathing community. I climbed down from my cab, rubbing my eyes, and wondering if I was dreaming, and walked toward the gas station. Through the windows, I could see an attendant, a young woman in her 20s, doing something at the counter. And when I pushed open the door, she looked up and smiled, as if it was perfectly normal for me to be there. At 2 in the morning, in a town that hadn't existed an hour ago. "Fill up?" she asked, her voice pleasant and ordinary, and I nodded, too confused to do anything else. She activated the pumps, and I went outside to fuel my truck. And while the diesel was flowing, I looked around at the town, trying to understand what I was seeing. People were out now, walking on the sidewalks, cars driving down the main street, a diner across the way showing customers inside, eating and drinking coffee. It was like someone had flipped a switch and brought the whole town to life at exactly 2 a.m. I paid for my fuel and asked the attendant what was going on, why the town had been dark and now was lit up. and she gave me a strange look, like she didn't understand the question. "It's always like this," she said. "Things open at 2, close at 4. That's just how it works here." I asked why, what made this town different, and she shrugged, her smile fading slightly. "It's just the way it's always been. Nobody really questions it anymore." I wanted to ask more, wanted to understand, but something in her expression told me she wouldn't or couldn't explain further. So I thanked her and walked across the street to the diner, drawn by curiosity and the need to confirm that this was real, that I wasn't hallucinating the whole thing. Inside, the diner was full, maybe 20 people eating and talking, all of them looking perfectly normal, perfectly ordinary, except for the fact that they were all awake and active at 2 in the morning in a town that had been empty an hour earlier. I sat at the counter and ordered coffee, and the waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a tired smile, brought me a cup that was hot and strong and definitely real. I sipped it and looked around, studying the other customers, and they all seemed normal enough. Families and couples and solo diners, all going about their business as if eating pancakes at 2 a.m. was the most natural thing in the world. "First time in Millbrook?" the waitress asked, refilling my cup, and I nodded. "Thought so. You've got that look, that confusion people get when they first see how things work here. You get used to it though, or you leave and don't come back." "Most people choose the latter," she said it matter-of-factly, without judgment, and I asked her how long she'd been here, whether she'd always lived in a town that only woke up at 2 a.m. "Born here," she said. 63 years in Millbrook, and yeah, it's always been this way. My grandparents said it started after the war, World War II, when something happened at the old munitions plant outside of town. Nobody talks about what exactly happened, but after that the town started keeping these hours, 2 to 4 a.m., every night, like clockwork. During the day we sleep, during the evening we sleep, but come 2 a.m., everyone wakes up and lives their lives for those 2 hours. I asked what happened at 4, whether the town went dark again, and she nodded, like someone turns off a switch. 4 a.m. comes, and everyone goes home, goes to bed, and the whole town shuts down until the next night. We've tried fighting it, tried staying awake during normal hours, but it doesn't work. Your body just shuts down, forces you to sleep, and you wake up at 2, whether you want to or not. The idea was horrifying and fascinating in equal measure, an entire community trapped in a 2-hour window, living compressed lives in the middle of the night while the rest of the world slept. I asked if people could leave, if they could move away and live normal schedules, and she got a sad look on her face. Some have tried, but most who leave end up coming back. The schedule stays with you, follows you wherever you go. You'll be living in some city, trying to work a normal job, and 2 a.m. hits, and you wake up, can't get back to sleep until 4. It ruins you for normal life, makes it impossible to function. So most people just stay here, where everyone's on the same schedule, where you're not the only person awake in the middle of the night. I stayed in that diner until almost 4 a.m., talking to the waitress and the other customers, learning about their lives and how they'd adapted to this strange schedule. They had jobs and families and dreams, just like people anywhere, but everything was compressed, accelerated. Lived in those 2 precious hours when the town was awake. Children went to school at 2:15, got out at 3:30. The bank was open from 2 to 3:45. People went to church at 3 on Sunday mornings. Weddings and funerals squeezed into that narrow window. As 4 a.m. approached, I could feel the energy in the diner changing, people finishing their meals quickly, checking their watches, preparing to leave. The waitress gave me my check and told me I should probably get going, that I didn't want to be in town when 4 a.m. hit, that outsiders who stayed sometimes found themselves trapped, found themselves joining the town's strange rhythm and unable to leave. I paid and walked quickly back to my truck, and as I started the engine, the clock on the gas station sign clicked over to 4 a.m. Immediately the lights began going out, the streetlights dimming, the diner going dark behind me. and within seconds the entire town was black and silent again, as if it had never been awake at all. I pulled out onto the highway and drove away quickly, hands shaking, mind reeling from what I'd experienced. I've been back through that area several times since then, always driving through Millbrook around 2 a.m. just to see if it was real, if I'd really experienced what I remembered. And every time, like clockwork, the town comes alive at exactly 2 a.m. and dies again at 4. The same faces in the same places, living their compressed lives in that narrow window. I've thought about stopping again, about talking more with the residents and trying to understand what happened to trap them this way. But I'm afraid if I stay too long I'll become trapped too. Will find myself waking at 2 a.m. for the rest of my life no matter where I go. The town that wakes only at 2 a.m. is still there, still following its strange schedule. And I imagine it will continue that way forever, or until whatever curse or phenomenon that created it finally lifts. The people there are real, their lives are real, but they're living in a pocket of time that's separated from the rest of the world, isolated by a schedule that makes normal interaction impossible. And sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, when I check my clock and see it's 2 a.m., I think about them all waking up at the same moment, the lights coming on in that small Arkansas town, another 2 hours of life beginning before the darkness claims them again. The highway patrol, who fades in the light from Big Mike. Law enforcement on the highways is a constant. State troopers and highway patrol officers maintaining order and safety on the roads we travel. You see them regularly if you drive long enough, parked in median strips or behind billboards, running radar or responding to accidents. They're part of the landscape of the road, familiar and expected, and when you see those lights in your mirror, you know what to expect, what's coming. But not all highway patrol are what they seem. Not all of them follow the normal rules of existence, and some of them have been patrolling the same stretches of road long after they should have retired, or moved on, or died. My name is Mike. They call me Big Mike, because I stand 6'5" and weigh about 2 IT. Big, even among truckers, who tend to be bigger than average, and I've been hauling oversized loads for 17 years. I know the highways intimately, know where the wait stations are, and where the patrol cars hide. Know which officers are reasonable, and which ones are looking for any excuse to write a ticket. But the highway patrol officer I encountered on a desert highway in Nevada didn't fit any pattern I knew, didn't behave like any cop I'd ever dealt with. It was just after dawn, that magical hour, when the sun is up but the air is still cool, and I was heading east on Highway 50, the so-called loneliest road in America. I was making good time. The road was empty, and I was thinking about breakfast when I saw the patrol car in my mirror, lights flashing, clearly signaling me to pull over. I checked my speed, confirmed I wasn't over the limit, and tried to think what I might have done wrong, but nothing came to mind. Still, when the patrol says, "Pull over," you pull over, so I eased onto the shoulder and waited. The officer approached from behind, and I could see him in my side mirror. A tall figure in the standard uniform and wide-brimmed hat that highway patrol wear in Nevada. He walked with purpose, but without hurry, and when he reached my window, I rolled it down and prepared to hand over my license and registration. But before I could say anything, before I could ask what the problem was, he looked up at me and I saw his face clearly for the first time. He was young, maybe 30, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to look right through me, rather than at me. But there was something wrong with him, something I couldn't quite identify at first. His uniform looked slightly faded, like it had been in the sun too long, and his badge seemed dull, tarnished in a way that suggested age or neglect. And when he spoke, his voice had a strange quality to it, distant and echoing slightly, as if it was coming from farther away than the few feet between us. "License and registration," he said, the standard opening, and I handed them over, watching as he studied them with those strange, penetrating eyes. The sun was getting brighter now, rising higher in the sky, and I noticed something disturbing as the sunlight hit him directly, as it illuminated his face and uniform. He seemed to become less solid, less substantial, like he was fading, becoming translucent. I blinked, convinced I was seeing things, that the early morning light was playing tricks on my eyes, but when I looked again the effect was even more pronounced. I could see through him, could see the desert landscape behind him, could see his patrol car through his body, as if he was made of smoke or mist rather than flesh and bone. My heart started racing, and I felt that familiar surge of adrenaline that comes from encountering something impossible, something that shouldn't exist. "You were speeding," he said, still studying my documents, and I wanted to argue. Wanted to point out that I'd checked my speed, and I was well within the limit. But the words died in my throat because I could barely see him now, could barely make out his form as the sunlight grew stronger. He was fading away, dissolving in the light like a vampire in an old movie, except there was no drama to it. No pain or horror, just a gradual diminishment until he was barely visible. He handed back my license and registration, his hand passing through mine rather than touching it, a sensation like cold air moving across my skin. And he said something I couldn't quite hear, his voice fading along with his form. I watched as he walked back toward his patrol car, or where his patrol car should have been. But when I looked in my mirror, I saw that the car was fading too, becoming transparent. And by the time he would have reached it, both he and the vehicle had vanished completely, leaving only empty highway and the rising sun. I sat there for a long moment, hands shaking, trying to process what I'd just experienced. A highway patrol officer who had pulled me over and then faded away in the sunlight, disappearing as if he'd never existed. I got out of my truck and walked back to where his car had been parked, and there was nothing. No tire tracks in the soft shoulder, no footprints, no evidence that anything had been there. I drove on to the next town, my mind racing, and I stopped at a diner where I asked the waitress if she knew anything about highway patrol on this stretch of road, if there had been any officers who'd died or disappeared in the area. She gave me a knowing look, like I wasn't the first person to ask. And she told me about Officer James Mackenzie, a highway patrol officer who'd been killed in the line of duty back in 1987, shot during a traffic stop by a wanted fugitive who'd been fleeing across the state. Mackenzie had been 31 when he died, had left behind a wife and 2 young children, and the patrol had named a memorial after him at the spot where he'd been killed, which happened to be on this same stretch of Highway 50. People reported seeing him sometimes, especially at dawn, still making his rounds, still pulling over speeders and checking licenses, still doing the job he'd loved, even though he'd been dead for over 30 years. The waitress said he only appeared at certain times, when the light was just right, and he always faded away as the sun rose higher, as if daylight itself was poison to whatever kept his spirit anchored to this highway. Some people thought he was looking for the man who killed him, still trying to complete that final traffic stop. Others believed he was just dedicated, couldn't let go of his duty, even in death, and would patrol this road forever, or until he finally accepted that his watch was over. I thought about Officer Mackenzie as I finished my coffee, thought about what it must be like to be trapped in that moment, endlessly repeating the same routine, pulling over drivers and checking their documents, slowly fading as the light grew stronger until you disappeared completely, only to return the next dawn and do it all over again. The thought was heartbreaking and terrifying in equal measure, a kind of purgatory where duty and death became indistinguishable. Since that day I've been back on Highway 50 many times, always watching for that patrol car, always half expecting to see Officer Mackenzie in my mirrors. I've seen him twice more, both times at dawn, both times watching him fade as the sun rose. And each time I feel a mixture of sadness and respect for this ghost who can't stop working, can't stop serving, even though his service ended decades ago. The highway patrol who fades in the light taught me that dedication can outlast death, that some people are so committed to their purpose that they continue fulfilling it even when they're no longer alive. It taught me to respect the officers I encounter, to remember that they're people doing a difficult job, and that sometimes that job comes with a price higher than any of us should have to pay. I carry Officer Mackenzie's story with me now, Share it sometimes with other drivers when the conversation turns to strange encounters on the road. And sometimes, when I'm driving through Nevada at dawn, I slow down even when I'm not speeding. Give a little nod to whatever might be watching from the side of the road. A gesture of respect for an officer who's still on patrol, still doing his duty, still serving and protecting even though the sun makes him fade, and the world has moved on without him.